In the Holt Kingdom, where your wolf decides everything, Elara Vance had nothing. No shift, no power, no future. For 22 years she was invisible, a mistake her own pack tried to forget. But when an assassin's arrow flew toward Alpha King Draven Holt, she did the unthinkable. She threw herself in front of it. They called her worthless. She proved them wrong by dying to save a king who didn't even know her name. But death wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Will the girl they called broken become the one thing the kingdom cannot destroy? Stay until the end to find out how rejection becomes power. Drop a like, comment the city you're watching from, and let's dive in. The first time Elara Vance understood she was nothing, she was 7 years old. The lunar ceremony had just ended. Every child born that year stood in the ceremonial circle while the elders watched, waiting for the sign. The first shimmer of eyes changing color, the first hint of claws, the telltale scent of wolf emerging. One by one, the children shifted. Partially, clumsily, but enough. Enough to prove they belonged. Elara stood in the center and felt nothing. No heat under her skin. No surge of instinct. Just the cold night air and the weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching her fail. Her mother had gripped her hand so tight it hurt. Her father stood rigid beside them, his jaw clenched, his disappointment radiating like heat from a forge. "It's all right," her mother whispered. "Sometimes it takes longer. You're just—" But the elder had already turned away, and Elara learned what silence sounded like when it meant rejection. 15 years later, nothing had changed. Elara woke before dawn in a room barely big enough for a bed and a trunk. The servant quarters. Her home since she turned 16 and her parents quietly suggested she might be more useful working in the castle than living at home, a constant reminder of their shame. She dressed in the dark, plain gray dress, apron, boots worn thin at the heels, and tied her black hair back with a strip of cloth. The mirror on the wall was cracked, but she could still see herself. Pale skin, sharp cheekbones, gray eyes that held nothing special. She looked human, because that's all she was. The castle was already stirring when she stepped into the corridor. Servants rushed past carrying linens, trays, buckets of water. No one looked at her. They never did. After 6 years, she'd perfected the art of being invisible. She preferred it that way. "Elara," or she used to. Maurice, the head housekeeper, appeared at the end of the corridor, her face pinched with irritation. She was a beta wolf, middle-aged and perpetually frustrated with everyone beneath her, which was most people. "You're late," Maris snapped. "I'm not. It's barely past 5. The lunar gathering starts today. Every visiting alpha expects perfection, and I will not have you embarrassing this household." She thrust a bundle of pressed linens into Elara's arms. "Take these to the guest wing. 3rd floor, eastern corridor. And for the God's sake, don't drop them." Elara bit back a response and nodded. Maris leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "And stay out of sight. We have actual wolves staying here this week. Important ones. They don't need to see you." The words landed like they always did, familiar, dull, meant to remind her she didn't belong. Elara turned and walked away before Maris could see her face. The lunar gathering was the kingdom's most important event. Twice a year, allied packs traveled to the capital to renew bonds, settle disputes, and show strength. For 3 days, the castle would be filled with alphas, warriors, dignitaries, and enough political posturing to choke on. Elara hated it. The guests treated servants like furniture. And wolfless servants? They didn't even register as alive. She climbed the narrow back staircase to the 3rd floor, her arms aching under the weight of the linens. The guest wing was lavish compared to the rest of the castle. High ceilings, polished wood, windows that let in streams of morning light. She moved quickly, keeping her head down, trying to finish before anyone saw her. She was halfway down the eastern corridor when she heard voices. 2 men, talking in low, urgent tones behind a closed door. "Can't wait any longer. If we don't move now, the timing has to be perfect. One mistake and we're dead. He'll be in the courtyard this afternoon. Exposed, surrounded by civilians. It's the best chance we'll get." Elara froze. She knew she shouldn't be listening, knew she should walk away, finish her work, mind her own business like she always did. But something in the tone, the cold calculation, the barely concealed violence, made her stomach twist. And the girl? the first voice asked. What girl? The wolfless one. She's always around. What if she sees something? A pause. Then a laugh. Her? She's nobody. Even if she saw us, who would believe her? The door opened. Elara jerked back, her heart slamming into her ribs. She turned and walked away as quickly as she could without running, the linens clutched against her chest. Behind her, the voices faded, but the words followed. He'll be in the courtyard this afternoon, exposed. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what they were planning, but every instinct she had, the few that hadn't been beaten down by years of rejection, screamed that something was very, very wrong. She tried to tell someone. First, she found Maris in the kitchens, overseeing preparations for the evening feast. I need to talk to you, Elara said. Not now, I'm busy. It's important. I heard. I don't care what you heard. Maris didn't even look up. Unless it's about linens or dishes, it's not my concern. But out, now! Elara left, frustration burning in her chest. She tried a guard next, a young beta stationed near the main hall. Excuse me, she said, I need to report something. He looked at her like she'd just asked him to juggle knives. Report what? I overheard a conversation, two men talking about someone being in danger, in the courtyard this afternoon. The guard's expression shifted from confusion to disdain. Who are you? Elara, I work in... A servant. He crossed his arms. And you're reporting a conversation you overheard. Do you have names, descriptions, any actual evidence? No, but... Then stop wasting my time. He turned away, dismissing her completely. Elara stood there, shaking. She'd tried. She'd done what she was supposed to do. And no one cared, because she was nobody. By midday, the courtyard was packed. The official welcome ceremony was underway. Visiting alphas stood in formation, their warriors flanking them, while the kingdom's highest-ranking wolves looked on. Banners snapped in the wind, drums echoed off the stone walls. And at the center of it all, standing on the raised dais, was Alpha King Draven Holt. Elara had seen him before, of course. Everyone had, but always from a distance, always as a figure more myth than man. The youngest king in 3 generations, brutal in battle, ruthless in politics, untouchable in every way that mattered. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of molten amber. He wore black, simple and unadorned, but he didn't need decoration. Power radiated off him like heat from a flame. He was everything Elara wasn't, strong, certain, undeniable. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, half hidden behind a column, and watched as he addressed the gathered crowd. His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command attention. And then she saw it, a figure on the rooftop, cloaked, hooded, moving with the kind of precision that only came from training. Elara's blood turned to ice. The figure knelt, drawing a longbow from beneath the cloak. The arrow was already nocked, black-tipped, aimed directly at the dais. At the king. He'll be in the courtyard this afternoon. Exposed. Time slowed. Elara's mind screamed at her to move, to shout, to do something, but her body was frozen. She was nobody. She had no power, no authority, no reason to think anyone would listen to her. But she had a choice. And in that split second, she made it. She ran. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. She shoved through the crowd, ignoring the shouts, the hands grabbing at her, the confusion exploding around her. The assassin released the arrow. Elara threw herself forward. The impact was like being hit by a hammer made of fire. The arrow punched through her chest, just below her collarbone, and the force of it drove her backward. She hit the ground hard, her skull cracking against stone. Pain exploded, white-hot and all-consuming, spreading through her body like poison. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Distantly, she heard shouting, felt hands on her, tasted blood. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her whole was a pair of amber eyes staring down at her, wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. Then nothing. She woke to agony. Not the clean, sharp pain of the arrow. This was different, deeper, hotter, like something was rewriting her from the inside out. Her chest burned. Her blood felt like molten metal. Every nerve in her body screamed. Elara gasped and opened her eyes. She was in a room she didn't recognize. Dark wood, high ceilings, a bed too soft to be real. Firelight flickered against the walls, casting everything in shades of gold and shadow. And sitting beside the bed, his head in his hands, was the king. Draven Holt looked like he'd been through a war. His shirt was half unbuttoned, streaked with blood. Her blood, she realized. His hair was disheveled. His face was drawn tight with exhaustion. He looked up when she moved. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're alive," he said finally. His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting or screaming. Elara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her chest, sharp enough to steal her breath. "Don't move." Draven was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, pressing her gently back down. "You're not healed yet." "What happened?" His jaw tightened. "You died." The words hung in the air. What?" "The arrow went through your chest, punctured your lung. You bled out before the healers could reach you." His amber eyes burned into hers. "Your heart stopped. You were gone." Elara stared at him, trying to process that. "But I'm not." "No." He pulled back, his hands clenching into fists. "You're not, because I wouldn't let you be." "I don't understand." Draven stood and paced to the window, his shoulders rigid. "I did something I shouldn't have, something dangerous." He turned to face her. "I bound your life to mine." The room tilted. "You... what?" "It's called a soul bond, a life bond. I gave you part of my essence, my power, to pull you back from death." His voice was flat, but his eyes betrayed him, haunted, furious, desperate. "It means we're connected now. What happens to me affects you. What happens to you affects me. If one of us dies, the other does too," Elara finished, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Why would you do that?" "Because you threw yourself in front of an arrow for me." The words exploded out of him. "You're nobody. You said it yourself, and you still chose to die for someone who never even spoke to you. What was I supposed to do, let you stay dead?" "Yes." "Well, I didn't." He crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "So now you're alive. And now we're both stuck with this." Elara pressed her hands against her face, trying to process the impossible. She could feel it now, the bond. A thread of awareness connecting her to him, faint but undeniable. She could sense his presence even without looking, feel the tension coiled in his body, the anger and fear warring beneath his skin. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yes. I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." She looked up at him, and for the first time she saw past the king to the man beneath, exhausted, furious, and absolutely terrified of what he'd done. "What happens now?" she asked. Draven's expression went cold. "Now? You survive, because if you die, so do I, and I have a kingdom to protect." He walked to the door and stopped, his hand on the frame. "Welcome to the nightmare, Elara Vance. Try not to get us both killed." The door closed behind him, and Elara was left alone with the fire burning in her chest and the certainty that her life would never be simple again. The whispers started immediately. By the time Elara was strong enough to walk, the entire castle knew. The wolfless servant who'd taken an arrow for the king, the girl who'd died and come back, the nobody who was now tied to the most powerful man in the kingdom. The reactions ranged from disbelief to disgust. Elara heard it all as she made her way through the corridors 2 days later, still weak but refusing to stay in bed any longer. "Did you hear?" She manipulated him, threw herself at him more like. Desperate, unnatural. A bond like that with a wolfless girl? It's wrong. She kept her head down and kept walking. Maris found her in the servants' corridor. "You," the housekeeper said, her voice sharp as glass. "What did you do?" Elara stopped. "I saved his life. You threw yourself at the king, and now you're living in the guest wing like you're somebody." Maris stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You think this makes you special? You think this changes what you are?" "I don't think anything." "Good, because you're still nothing. A bond doesn't give you a wolf, doesn't give you power. All it means is you're a liability now. And liabilities don't last long in this kingdom." Maris walked away, leaving Elara standing alone in the corridor, her hands shaking. That night, Draven sent for her. She found him in his study, a large room filled with maps, books, and the kind of controlled chaos that came from managing a kingdom. He was standing at his desk, staring at a document, a glass of amber liquid untouched at his elbow. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said. She sat. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set the document down and looked at her, his amber eyes unreadable. "The council wants you dead." Elara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Not officially, but 3 members have already suggested that the bond is unnatural and should be severed, which, of course, would kill you." His tone was casual, but his jaw was tight. "They're calling you a distraction, a weakness, a mistake. Maybe they're right. They're not." He picked up the glass, swirled the liquid, then set it back down without drinking. "But they're dangerous, and you need to understand what you're up against." "I didn't ask to be up against anything." "Too bad." He rounded the desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. "You're in this now. And if you want to survive, you need to stop acting like a victim and start acting like someone who has something to lose." Elara's hands clenched into fists. "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn." "I'm not a wolf. I'm not a warrior. I'm not—" "You're alive," Draven interrupted. "That's more than most people can say after taking an arrow through the chest. So stop telling me what you're not and figure out what you are." He pushed off the desk and walked to the window, his back to her. "There's something happening to you," he said quietly. "I can feel it through the bond, a change, a power waking up." Elara's breath caught. "I don't have power." "You didn't, but you do now. I don't know what it is yet, but it's there." He glanced over his shoulder. "And that scares them more than anything." "Why?" "Because power without a wolf is unheard of. It breaks the rules. And people who break the rules either get destroyed or they become legends." He turned fully to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her chest tighten. "So which will you be, Elara Vance, destroyed or legendary?" She didn't have an answer. The next morning, Draven assigned her a trainer. Commander Elijah Rourke was everything Elara wasn't: strong, confident, and utterly terrifying. She was in her early 30s with auburn hair cropped short and a scar running from her left temple to her jaw. She was also the head of the king's personal guard, which meant she'd killed more people than Elara had ever met. "You're the girl," Licia said when they met in the training yard. "Yes." "The one who can't shift." "Yes." Licia walked a slow circle around her, assessing. "No muscle, no training, reaction time probably terrible." She stopped in front of Elara. "Why does the king want me to train you?" "I don't know." "Liar. He doesn't waste my time on charity cases." Licia crossed her arms. "So what's the real reason?" Elara hesitated, then decided honesty was less dangerous than a lie. "He thinks I have power, that something's changing in me." "Do you?" "I don't know." Licia studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, sharp and predatory. "Good. Let's find out." She moved so fast, Elara barely saw it. One moment, Elijah was standing 3 feet away. The next, Elara was on her back in the dirt, the wind knocked out of her, staring up at the sky. "Lesson 1, Licia said, offering a hand. "Your enemies won't wait for you to be ready." Elara took the hand and let herself be pulled up, her ribs aching. "Again," Licia said. She attacked. Elara went down. "Again." Down. Again. Down. By the 10th time, Elara's entire body was screaming. By the 20th, she could barely stand. "Enough," Licia said finally. "You're done for today." Elara collapsed onto a bench, gasping, her vision swimming. Licia sat beside her and handed her a water skin. "You're weak, slow, predictable. But you didn't quit." Elara drank, her hands shaking. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No. It's supposed to make you realize you've got one thing most people don't." Licia stood. Stubbornness. Use it. She walked away, leaving Elara alone in the yard, every muscle in her body staging a rebellion. The attack started 3 days later. Elara was crossing the eastern courtyard when she felt it, a spike of danger so sharp it made her stumble. She spun, instinct screaming, and saw the glint of metal. A knife thrown from the shadows. She dropped. The blade whistled past her head and embedded itself in the wall behind her. Elara scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, and scanned the courtyard. No one, just shadows and empty space. But she could still feel it, the lingering sense of threat, like a hand pressed against her throat. She ran. She found Draven in the war room, surrounded by maps and advisors. He looked up when she burst in, his expression shifting instantly from irritation to alarm. What happened? Someone just tried to kill me. The room went silent. Draven was across the room in 3 strides, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes blazing. Where? Eastern courtyard. A knife. She swallowed hard. I felt it before it happened. I don't know how, but I knew. His grip tightened. Then he released her and turned to the nearest guard. Lock down the eastern wing. Search every room. I want whoever did this found. Now. The guard ran. Draven turned back to Elara, his jaw tight. You're moving into the royal wing. My quarters. Where I can protect you. I can't. You will. His voice left no room for argument. From now on, you don't go anywhere without a guard. You don't take food from anyone I haven't approved, and you stay close. This is insane. This is survival. He stepped closer, and the bond pulsed between them, hot and undeniable. Someone wants you dead, Elara, and they're not going to stop. So unless you want to make it easy for them, you do exactly what I say. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight back against the suffocating weight of it all, but the fear in his eyes, fear for her, stole the words from her throat. Okay, she whispered. Draven nodded once. Then he turned to the remaining advisors. Meeting's over. Get out. They left, and Elara stood there, trembling, as the reality of her new life crashed down around her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a target, and the kingdom was hunting. That night, she couldn't sleep. The royal wing was too quiet, too large, too far from anything familiar. She lay in the bed Draven had assigned her, a guest room connected to his private chambers, and stared at the ceiling. The bond hummed. She could feel him nearby, awake and restless. Finally, she gave up. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and padded barefoot into the main chamber. Draven was standing at the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. Can't sleep? He asked without turning. No. Neither can I. She crossed the room and stood beside him. The view from the window stretched across the valley, forests and hills bathed in silver light. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Saving me? Draven was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. But I regret what it's cost you. What do you mean? You had a life. Quiet. Invisible. Safe. And I took that from you. He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw. Now you're in constant danger because of me. I chose to step in front of that arrow. You shouldn't have had to. Elara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. For what it's worth, I don't regret it either. Even with everything that's happened, I'd rather be alive and terrified than dead and forgotten. Draven's expression softened, just slightly. You're stronger than you think, he said. I don't feel strong. Good. The moment you start feeling strong is the moment you get careless. He turned back to the window. Strength isn't about power, Elara. It's about refusing to break. And you haven't broken yet. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think she could survive this, but the fear sat heavy in her chest, cold and unrelenting. What if I do break? She whispered. Draven didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but absolute. Then I'll put you back together. And despite everything, the danger, the fear, the impossible weight of the bond, Elara felt something shift inside her. A spark. Small. Fragile. But alive. The council meeting happened 2 days later. Elara was summoned to the throne room with no warning and no explanation. When she arrived, the room was packed. Every noble, every pack leader, every advisor stood in attendance. The air was thick with tension. And at the center of it all, sitting on the throne, was Draven. Councilor Oren stepped forward. He was tall and silver-haired with eyes like chips of ice and a smile that made Elara's skin crawl. Elara Vance, he said, his voice carrying across the room. You stand accused. Elara's blood went cold. Accused of what? Manipulation, conspiracy, using unnatural means to entrap the king. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some outraged, some gleeful, all of them eager to see where this would go. Draven shot to his feet. This is absurd. Is it? Oren turned to face him. A wolfless servant throws herself in front of an arrow, conveniently survives through a life bond, and now resides in the royal wing under your protection. Some might call that a very calculated move. I didn't, Elara started. Silence. Oren's voice cracked like a whip. You have no standing here. She has standing, Draven snarled, descending from the dais, because I say she does. Oren smiled. And therein lies the problem, Your Majesty. You are compromised. The bond clouds your judgment. For the good of the kingdom, she must be removed. Touch her, Draven said, his voice dropping into something that made the air feel heavier, and I will personally tear this council apart. Silence. The threat hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Oren's smile didn't falter. Then perhaps we should put it to a vote. Let the council decide her fate. No. Your Majesty, I said no. Draven's amber eyes blazed. Elara stays, and anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly. The room went deathly quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. And slowly, Oren inclined his head. As you wish. But the smile on his face promised this wasn't over shot. After the meeting, Draven found Elara on the ramparts. She was standing at the edge, staring out at the valley, her hands gripping the stone so hard her knuckles were white. You shouldn't have done that, she said without turning. I had to. You threatened the entire council. For me. Yes. She turned to face him, anger and fear warring in her chest. Why? I'm nobody. I'm not worth— Stop! Draven closed the distance between them in 2 strides. Stop saying that. You're not nobody, not anymore. Maybe you never were. They hate me. They fear you. There's a difference. I don't have anything to make them fear. You have me. His voice was low, fierce, and that's more than enough. Elara stared at him, her chest tight. The bond pulsed between them, hot and undeniable. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. What happens now? She asked. Draven's expression hardened. Now? We fight, because this kingdom is about to tear itself apart, and we're standing right in the middle. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the ramparts with the wind and the stars, and the terrible, exhilarating certainty that everything was about to change. The 7th day, the assassins struck again. Elara was in the training yard with Lycia when she felt it. That same sharp spike of danger, stronger this time, undeniable. She spun, blade up, just as a hooded figure lunged from the shadows. Lycia moved faster, intercepting the attacker and slamming them to the ground. The figure struggled, then went still. Lycia yanked back the hood. It was one of the guards. Talk, Lycia commanded, her blade at his throat. The guard's eyes were wild. Orders from the council. They said she's a threat, that she needed to be eliminated before— Before what? But the guard's eyes rolled back, foam bubbling at his lips. Poison. He was dead before Lycia could react. Elara stood frozen, staring at the body. They're serious, Lycia said quietly. This isn't just politics anymore. This is war. Draven's rage was volcanic. Within an hour, the entire council was dragged to the throne room. Elara stood to the side, flanked by guards, and watched as the king tore into them with a fury that shook the walls. Someone here just tried to have her killed, Draven snarled. Using my own guards, in my own castle. I want a name, now. Silence. I said now. Oren stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, if such an order was given, it was not sanctioned by the full council. I don't care. Draven's voice was ice. Someone gave that order, and when I find out who, I will make an example of them that this kingdom will never forget. He turned to face the assembled nobles, and the bond blazed between him and Elara, hot and absolute. From this moment forward, Draven said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, Elara Vance is under my direct protection. She is not to be touched, not to be threatened, not to be questioned. She stays. And anyone who has a problem with that answers to me. The room exploded into chaos. But Draven didn't flinch. He looked at Elara, and in his eyes she saw something that took her breath away. Not just protection, not just duty, but belief. He believed she was worth fighting for. And for the first time in her life, Elara started to believe it too. That night, the castle burned. Elara smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She bolted from her room, heart hammering, and found the eastern wing engulfed. Servants screamed, guards shouted, chaos swallowed everything, and through the bond she felt Draven's panic. She ran. She found him in the main corridor, directing evacuations, his face streaked with soot. "Elara, there are people still inside," she said. "I know. We're getting them." A scream cut through the air. A child's scream. Elara didn't think. She ran into the fire. The heat was unbearable. Smoke choked her lungs. But she pushed forward, following the sound, until she found her. A little girl, maybe 5, trapped behind a collapsed beam. "I've got you," Elara gasped, scooping her up. She turned to run. The ceiling collapsed. Elara threw herself forward, shielding the child, and felt the impact, wood and stone and fire crashing down. And then, the bond roared. Power surged through her, wild and uncontrolled. The fire bent away from her, the smoke cleared, and when Elara opened her eyes, she was standing in a pocket of clear air, the flames curling around her like they were afraid. She didn't understand, didn't question. She just ran. She burst out of the building, the child in her arms, both of them alive. The crowd erupted, and Draven was there, pulling her into his arms, his whole body shaking. "What the hell was that?" he breathed. "I don't know," she whispered, but the fire in her chest burned brighter than ever, and she realized with a cold, terrifying certainty she wasn't powerless anymore. The fire changed everything, but not in the way Elara expected. By dawn, the eastern wing was a blackened skeleton. 3 servants dead, 14 injured, some with burns so severe the healers weren't sure they'd survive. Half the guest quarters reduced to ash and twisted metal beams that jutted from the rubble like broken bones. The visiting alphas who'd stayed for the lunar gathering packed their belongings before the sun cleared the horizon, citing security concerns and barely concealed disgust at the chaos that had consumed what should have been a celebration of unity. But what truly terrified the castle, what sent whispers racing through corridors and servants huddling in corners, wasn't the destruction itself. It was what they'd witnessed in those final, impossible moments. Elara Vance, the wolfless girl, the nothing, walking through flames that bent around her like they were afraid to touch her skin. She stood now in Draven's private chambers, hours past dawn, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. They looked ordinary, pale skin marked with small scars from kitchen work, fresh blisters from gripping practice weapons too tightly during Lycia's brutal training sessions, nails bitten short from anxiety. Nothing special, nothing powerful, but she could still feel it. That surge of energy that had roared through her veins when the ceiling collapsed, when death was seconds away, when every instinct screamed that she was about to burn alive. The way the fire had obeyed when she'd silently begged it to stay back. The way her body had moved through the inferno without a single burn marking her skin. It wasn't natural, she knew that. Everyone knew that. And now they were all waiting to see what would happen to the girl who'd broken every rule they understood about how magic worked. "Stop staring at your hands like they're going to explode," Draven said from across the room. Elara jerked her head up. She hadn't heard him enter, which said something about how distracted she was. He stood near the door, still wearing the clothes from last night. White shirt stained gray with soot, blood on the cuffs from helping pull survivors from the rubble. His dark hair was disheveled, face drawn with an exhaustion that went bone deep. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a single night. "What if they do?" Elara asked quietly. "Explode, I mean. What if I lose control and hurt someone?" "Then we'll deal with it." He crossed to the window, movements stiff with fatigue. Outside, workers were already clearing debris, though they gave the eastern wing a wide berth, as if whatever had happened there might still be contagious. "Vala's on her way. She'll have answers." "And if the answers are that I'm dangerous? That I'm exactly what they're all whispering about in the corridors?" Elara's voice cracked. "I heard them when the servants brought water this morning. Witch, demon spawn, cursed thing that should have been drowned at birth." Draven's hands clenched into fists on the windowsill. They're scared. Fear makes people cruel and stupid. Maybe they're right to be scared. Elara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly freezing despite the warmth of the morning sun streaming through the windows. I don't understand what happened. I don't know how I did it. What if next time I can't stop it? What if the fire doesn't bend away? What if it consumes everything and everyone around me? It won't. You can't know that. Draven turned from the window, and the intensity in his amber eyes was enough to steal her breath. Yes, I can. Because I felt you through the bond when it happened. I felt your terror, your desperation to save that child. But I also felt your control. You didn't let the power run wild. You directed it, shaped it, used it to protect instead of destroy. He took a step closer. That's not the mark of someone cursed. That's the mark of someone strong. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together. That's because you are barely holding yourself together. You died 3 weeks ago, came back bound to a king you'd never spoken to, survived multiple assassination attempts, and discovered you have magic that shouldn't exist. Anyone would be falling apart. His expression softened slightly. But you're still standing, still fighting. That counts for something. Before Elara could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp. Urgent. Enter, Draven called, his voice shifting instantly back to the hard edge of command. Vala swept in first, her usually composed face tight with worry. Behind her came Lycia, and then a man Elara had never seen before. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tail and spectacles that sat slightly crooked on his nose. He carried a leather satchel that looked older than he was, the kind of bag that had traveled through decades and held secrets in every crease. Your Majesty, Vala said, inclining her head. This is Scholar Revan. He's— I know what ancient bloodlines are, the man interrupted, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the rudeness. He was staring at Elara with an intensity that made her want to hide. And if my suspicions are correct, we're looking at something that hasn't walked this earth in over 300 years. Elara's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Revan set his satchel on the table and pulled out a book so old the leather binding was cracked and faded. I need to confirm something first. May I? He gestured toward her, his expression polite but urgent. Elara glanced at Draven, who gave a slight nod. All right, she said. Revan approached slowly, respectfully, like she was something precious that might shatter if handled roughly. I'm going to read your magical signature. It's not painful, but it might feel strange, like someone's examining something deep inside you. Wonderful, Elara muttered. His fingers were cool and dry when they wrapped around her wrist. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of construction outside and Elara's own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Then she felt it. A pull. Deep inside her chest, below her ribs, in that place where the bond to Draven lived. But this was different. This felt like invisible hands reaching into her core, touching something that had always been there but had never been awake before. That well of heat. That reservoir of power that had saved her life in the fire. Revan's eyes widened behind his spectacles. His grip on her wrist tightened, not painfully, but with shock. He sucked in a sharp breath. Then he released her and stepped back, removing his spectacles to clean them with shaking hands. Scholar? Draven prompted, his voice edged with impatience. She's unbonded, Revan said, his voice barely above a whisper. By all the old gods, she's actually unbonded. The room erupted. Licia's hand dropped to her sword hilt instinctively. Vala made a sound that might have been a gasp or a curse. Marcus, who'd been standing silently near the door, took a step forward as if to position himself between Elara and some invisible threat. And Draven went completely still, every muscle in his body tensing like he was preparing for a fight. Explain, he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Now. In words that don't require a library degree to understand. Revan replaced his spectacles with trembling fingers. The Unbonded were a bloodline so rare that most modern scholars believe they're nothing but myth. Ancient texts mention them, but they disappeared from written record approximately 320 years ago. He opened the ancient book, flipping to a page marked with a faded ribbon. They were born without wolves. Not because they were defective or broken, but because their magic came from a fundamentally different source than pack magic. What source? Elara asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Survival itself, pure primal survival instinct given form and power. Revan traced his finger down the page, reading. Where wolf magic is tied to the beast, to transformation, hierarchy, pack bonds, unbonded magic is tied to the most basic drive of any living creature, the will to continue existing, to protect, to endure, to overcome. That sounds powerful, Marcus said from his position by the door. It was. It is. Revan looked up from the book. The text described the Unbonded as guardians of the vulnerable. They could sense danger before it manifested, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours in advance. They could manipulate elements in moments of extreme need. Their bodies resisted injury in ways that defied logic. And their magic, when fully awakened, made them extraordinarily difficult to kill. So why don't they exist anymore? Lisha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer and didn't like it. Revan's expression darkened. Because 300 years ago, during the consolidation of pack power and the establishment of the current ruling structure, they were systematically hunted down and executed. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. They were murdered for being different, for being a threat to the established order, Revan corrected, though there was anger in his voice now. The packs were building their hierarchy, their system of dominance based on wolf strength and pack bonds. The Unbonded represented power that existed outside that structure, power that couldn't be controlled or predicted or bound by the usual rules. So the council of that era declared them unnatural, abominations, and they passed what history calls the Purge Law. Draven's voice was ice. What law? Immediate execution without trial for any individual whose magic derives from sources outside approved wolf bloodlines. Revan closed the book gently, as if it might crumble. The law was used to justify the genocide of an entire people. By the time anyone realized what they'd done, it was too late. The Unbonded were gone. That law was abolished, Draven said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice. Suspended, Vala said quietly. She'd been silent throughout Revan's explanation, but now she stepped forward, her face pale. The distinction matters, Your Majesty. The Purge Law was never formally repealed. It was suspended pending review, a review that never happened because everyone assumed the Unbonded were extinct. Let me guess, Elara said, her voice hollow. It can be reinstated. With a 2/3 council vote, Vala confirmed, and given current sentiment, she didn't need to finish. Elara understood perfectly. Half the council already wanted her dead. If they learned she was unbonded, that she represented a bloodline their ancestors had murdered wholesale, they'd move heaven and earth to finish the job. They can't know, Draven said, his voice hard with command. No one outside this room learns what she is. Not the council, not the guards, not anyone. They already suspect something, Lisha pointed out. Half the castle watched her walk through fire. We can claim it was the bond, your power protecting her, but that explanation only holds for so long. Then we make it hold. Draven turned to Revan. How long does she have before her power manifests again? Impossible to say. Unbonded magic responds to need and emotion. In moments of extreme danger or distress, it activates instinctively. But with training, she could learn to access it consciously, control it. How long would that training take? Revan exchanged a glance with Vala. For a normal magic user? Years. But Miss Vance isn't normal. Her power is already active, already responding. With intensive training, he hesitated. Weeks, maybe. If she's a fast learner and if we don't encounter any complications. We don't have weeks, Marcus said. Councilor Oren's been sending ravens since dawn. He's calling for an emergency council session, 3 days from now, maybe 4. What's the session about? Draven asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. A vote on whether to reinstate protective measures against unnatural magical threats. Marcus's expression was grim. It's carefully worded to sound reasonable, but everyone knows what it really means. They're going to try to execute her, Licia said bluntly. Over my dead body, Draven snarled, and power rolled off him in waves. Not magic, just pure, undiluted authority. The air in the room grew heavier. That might be exactly what they're hoping for. Vala said quietly. If you defend her too vigorously, they'll claim the bond has compromised your judgment, that you're unfit to rule. They could use this as justification for a coup. Elara's world was spinning. This was insane. A week ago, her biggest concern had been avoiding Maris's criticisms in the kitchen. Now she was apparently the last survivor of a genocide, bound to a king, and about to trigger a civil war just by existing. There has to be another way, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. What if I just leave? Disappear into the forests or the outer territories? Somewhere they can't find me. Then you can tell them I died, break the bond somehow. The bond can't be broken, Draven interrupted. Not without killing us both. And even if it could, do you honestly think they'd stop hunting you? You'd be a target for the rest of your life, and I'd be seen as weak for letting you go. He crossed to her, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. I'm not letting you run, and I'm not letting them kill you, so we find a third option. What option? Elara asked desperately. We prove you're not a threat. He turned to Revan and Vala. If she learns control, if she can demonstrate precision and restraint, then they can't claim she's dangerous. It's a risk, Revan warned. If she fails publicly, she won't fail, Draven said with absolute certainty. Through the bond, Elara felt his conviction, his unshakable belief that she could do this. She wished she shared it. Training started within the hour. They couldn't use the regular practice yards, too exposed, too many curious eyes. Instead, Vala led them deep into the castle's lower levels, through corridors Elara had never seen, down staircases that seemed to spiral into the earth itself. The air grew cooler and damper the further they descended, until finally they reached a chamber that felt older than the castle above. Warded room, Vala explained, running her hand along the wall. Symbols carved into the ancient stone began to glow with soft blue light. Everything that happens in here stays in here. We could bring down the ceiling and no one upstairs would feel a tremor. That's not as reassuring as you think it is, Elara muttered. The chamber was circular, perhaps 40 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. The walls were covered in those glowing symbols, hundreds of them, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. In the center sat a stone table holding various objects, bowls of water, unlit candles, stones, small plants, things Elara couldn't identify. We start with basics, Vala said, moving to the table. Magic at its core is about intent and control. The unbonded magic you carry is powerful, more powerful than most traditional magic users will ever achieve, but raw power without discipline is just destruction waiting to happen. So what do I do? Vala gestured to a simple white candle. You light it. Elara stared at the candle, looked at Vala, looked back at the candle. That's it? That's everything. You need to access your power consciously, direct it with precision, and release it in exactly the right amount. Too little and nothing happens. Too much and... She gestured vaguely. Well, let's avoid too much. Right, no pressure. All the pressure, Vala corrected. Because if you can't light a candle in a controlled environment, you certainly can't demonstrate control in front of the council. Now, close your eyes. Elara obeyed, feeling ridiculous. Find that place inside you where the power lives. You touched it last night. You know what it feels like. She did know. Elara turned her attention inward, searching through the familiar landscape of her own body. Heartbeat, breath, the distant hum of the bond connecting her to Draven. Deeper. Past the physical into something else entirely. There. That well of heat. That reservoir of energy that felt vast as an ocean and just as dangerous. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, alive and aware and eager. So eager. Like it had been waiting her entire life to be acknowledged. I feel it, Elara whispered. Good. Now reach for it. Not with your hands, with your intention. Imagine dipping a cup into a well. You only want a single cup of water, not the entire well. Can you do that? I think so. Don't think. No. Intent matters. Doubt creates failure. Elara focused harder. She visualized reaching into that well of power, imagined her intention like a ladle, scooping up just a tiny amount of energy. The candle exploded. Not metaphorically. The entire thing detonated in a ball of white-hot flame that would have incinerated the table if Vala hadn't reacted instantly, throwing up a shield that contained the blast. The explosion echoed off the stone walls, making Elara's ears ring. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the candle but a scorch mark. Too much, Vala said calmly, as if students exploded candles every day. You opened the floodgates instead of using the ladle. Try again. They replaced the candle. Elara tried again, this time being more cautious, reaching for less power. Nothing happened at all. The candle sat there, mocking her with its unlit wick. Too little, Vala said. You overcorrected. You need to find the middle ground. Not a flood, not a trickle, a steady stream. Third attempt. Elara focused, reached, pulled. The candle caught fire, burned brightly for exactly 2 seconds, then melted into a puddle of wax that spread across the table. Better, Vala said. You accessed the power and directed it toward the target. The amount was still wrong, but that's a matter of practice. Again. They spent 4 hours on that single candle. 4 hours of reaching, pulling, directing. 4 hours of explosions and failures and tiny incremental improvements. By the end, Elara could light the candle consistently, though the flame was never quite the right size, sometimes too large, sometimes guttering and weak. And twice she accidentally set the stone table itself on fire, which shouldn't have even been possible. Her head pounded like someone was driving nails into her skull. Sweat soaked through her shirt and dripped into her eyes. Every muscle in her body ached as if she'd been running for miles, though she'd barely moved from her spot in front of the table. That's enough for today, Vala finally announced, and Elara nearly collapsed with relief. You're exhausted, and pushing further will cause more harm than good. I barely accomplished anything, Elara protested weakly. You awakened dormant magic and bent it to your conscious will. That's not barely anything. That's extraordinary. Vala offered her a water skin. Magic is like a muscle, Miss Vance. Right now, yours has been asleep your entire life. It's weak from disuse. With regular exercise, it'll grow stronger. But if you push too hard too fast, you'll tear something that can't be easily repaired. What happens if I push too hard? Vala's expression became grave. Magical burnout. The power consumes you from the inside out. You become nothing but raw energy with no consciousness left to direct it. You burn until there's nothing left but ash and regret. She paused, letting that sink in. According to the texts, that's how most Unbonded died in the old days. Not from being hunted by packs, but from losing control of their own power. The words settled over Elara like a funeral shroud. Come on, Vala said, her voice gentler now. You need food and rest. We'll continue tomorrow morning and we'll add new exercises. By the time the council meets, you'll have at least basic control. It might not be perfect, but it'll be enough. Enough to keep her alive. Maybe. Elara followed Vala out of the warded chamber, her legs shaking with exhaustion, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The whispers grew worse over the next 2 days. Servants who'd once ignored Elara now went out of their way to avoid her. When she walked down corridors, people pressed themselves against walls as if she carried plague. Meals were delivered to Draven's chambers by terrified kitchen workers who set the trays down and fled before she could thank them. She heard the words they whispered. Demon, witch, cursed, abomination. The same words that had been used to justify genocide 3 centuries ago. Training continued with brutal intensity. Vala pushed her through exercises with water, freezing it, boiling it, moving it through the air in controlled streams. Elara destroyed 9 bowls, flooded the warded chamber's floor 3 times, and once accidentally created a wall of ice so thick it took Vala 20 minutes to melt it. But she was improving. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. By the 2nd day, she could freeze a bowl of water without shattering the container. Could boil water without causing an explosion. Could move a stream through the air for nearly 10 seconds before losing control. Your power responds quickly, Vala observed during one session, almost too quickly. Most magic users have to coax their abilities, persuade them to manifest. Yours seems eager, like it's been waiting to be used. Is that bad? It means you need to work twice as hard on restraint. Eager power is dangerous power. Vala handed her a fresh bowl. Again. But this time, I want you to freeze only the surface. 1 inch deep. Leave the water below completely liquid. It took 37 attempts, but Elara finally managed it. The victory felt hollow when she remembered she had less than 24 hours before the council meeting that might end her life. Lisha's combat training was even more brutal. The commander seemed to operate on the theory that the best way to teach someone to fight was to beat the lessons into them through repetition and pain. Your magic won't save you if someone gets inside your guard and opens your throat, Lisha said, demonstrating a knife technique that made Elara's stomach turn. You need to be able to fight with and without power. Your instincts need to be sharp enough that you react before you have time to think. Understood? Understood. They sparred. Elara lost. Over and over and over. But by the 20th bout, something shifted. Lisha came at her with a strike aimed at her ribs, and Elara's body moved before her mind caught up. Blocked, pivoted, countered with an elbow strike that actually connected with Lycia's shoulder. The commander stepped back, a rare smile crossing her face. There. That's what I'm talking about. You trusted your body instead of your overthinking brain. Do that consistently, and you might survive longer than a week. Your pep talks need work, Elara gasped, bent over with her hands on her knees. I don't do pep talks. I do brutal honesty. Lisha sheathed her practice blade. But you're not as hopeless as I thought you'd be when we started. So there's that. It was probably the kindest thing Lisha had ever said to her. The night before the council meeting, Elara couldn't sleep. She lay in the oversized bed in Draven's chambers, staring at the ceiling, listening to her own heartbeat and feeling the bond hum with Draven's restless presence. He was in his study again, dealing with last-minute political maneuvering, trying to secure enough votes to prevent the purge law from being reinstated. It wasn't going well. She could feel his frustration through the bond, sharp and bitter. Elara gave up on sleep and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, padding barefoot into the study. Draven sat at his desk, surrounded by papers and maps and lists of names with marks beside them. Allies, enemies, undecided. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep? Can you? No. He set down his pen and rubbed his face. Half the council is terrified of you. A quarter wants to use you as a political weapon against me. And the last quarter, he gestured at the papers with disgust. They don't care one way or another. They'll vote however benefits them most personally. Maybe I should just confess, Elara said quietly. Tell them what I am, accept exile or execution or whatever they decide. At least then it would be over. No. Draven, I said no. He stood, moving around the desk to face her. You did nothing wrong. Being born different isn't a crime, no matter what ancient laws say, and I'm not letting them murder you for the crime of existing. Even if it costs you your throne, even then. His amber eyes were fierce in the candlelight. I told you before, my throne is only worth keeping if this kingdom is the kind of place where someone like you can live. If I have to choose between power and doing what's right, I choose right, every time. That's a terrible strategy for staying king, probably. But I've made my choice. He reached out and caught her hand, his grip warm and solid. Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that council chamber, and you're going to show them exactly what you can do. You're going to demonstrate control and precision, and you're going to prove that power doesn't equal danger. What if I fail? You won't. You can't know that. Yes, I can. Because I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion for 2 days straight, never complaining, never giving up. Because I've felt your determination through the bond, because... He stopped, something flickering across his face, too quick to name. Because you're stronger than you think you are. You just haven't realized it yet. Elara's throat tightened. I'm terrified. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. But don't let it paralyze you. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the fight of your life, and I need you sharp. She nodded and turned to go. Elara? She glanced back. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they throw at you, remember that you're not alone. I'll be there. And I'm not letting them take you without a fight. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they made her heart ache with something she didn't have time to examine. She went back to bed and lay awake until dawn, watching light creep across the ceiling and wondering if this would be her last sunrise. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity when they arrived. Every noble, Every pack leader, every influential wolf in the kingdom had crowded into the massive stone room. They lined the walls, filled the balconies, spilled out into the corridors beyond. The air was thick with tension and the mingled sense of too many wolves in close quarters. Anger and fear and anticipation all mixed together into something toxic. Elara stood near the dais, flanked by Lycia and Marcus, trying to keep her hands from shaking. She dressed carefully in a simple gray dress. Nothing fancy, nothing that could be interpreted as putting on airs. Her hair was pulled back in a braid. No jewelry, no adornment. She wanted to look harmless, unthreatening. She wasn't sure it was working. Draven sat on the throne, his expression carved from granite. He wore formal robes, black embroidered with silver, and the crown of his office. Every inch the king. But through the bond, Elara felt his fury, coiled tight and ready to strike at anyone who threatened her. Councilor Oren stood in the center of the chamber, and if Elara hadn't known better, she might have believed he was genuinely concerned. His expression was grave, his posture that of a man bearing terrible responsibility. The bruises on his throat from when Draven had choked him had faded to yellow and green, making him look vulnerable. Wounded. It was an excellent performance. Your Majesty, honored council members, distinguished guests, Oren began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We gather today to address a matter of grave importance to the security and future of this kingdom. 3 nights ago, we witnessed an event that calls into question everything we thought we knew about the natural order. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The girl known as Elara Vance, a wolfless servant, walked through fire that should have killed her instantly. She emerged unharmed, unmarked, as if the flames themselves dared not touch her. Oren paused, letting that sink in. Some say this was the king's power protecting her through their bond. But I ask you, does that explanation truly satisfy? Does it account for what we all saw? Get to your point, Counselor, Draven said, his voice cold as winter. Very well. Oren turned to face the assembled crowd. I believe Miss Vance possesses unnatural magic. Magic that exists outside approved bloodlines. Magic that history has taught us is dangerous and unpredictable. His voice rose. I move to reinstate the Purge Law for the protection of this kingdom and all who dwell within it. The chamber exploded into chaos. Half the room erupted in agreement, shouts of, yes, and protect the kingdom. The other half responded with outrage and accusations. Wolves snarled at each other. Someone threw a punch. Guards had to physically separate 2 alphas who looked ready to shift and tear into each other. Draven's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Enough! Silence fell instantly. There will be order in this chamber, Draven continued, his power rolling through the room like a physical force. Or I will clear it and make this decision alone. Oren inclined his head. Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect, but the motion stands. We need a vote. Before we vote on executing someone, Draven said, each word sharp as broken glass, perhaps we should establish whether there's actually a threat. Counselor, you claim Miss Vance has dangerous, uncontrolled magic. Prove it. Oren smiled. I would be happy to. If Miss Vance would be willing to demonstrate her abilities. No, Draven interrupted. You don't get to force her to reveal anything. If you want proof she's dangerous, the burden is on you to provide it. Show me evidence that she's hurt anyone. Show me proof that she's a threat. She walked through fire. To save a child's life, that's called heroism, not danger. Unnatural power is only unnatural because you don't understand it. Draven leaned forward, his amber eyes blazing. You want to reinstate a law that was used to commit genocide. You want to execute a girl who's done nothing but exist differently than you. And you're hiding behind fear and prejudice to justify it. The room held its breath. Oren's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath. Then he smiled again. I'm not asking for execution, Your Majesty. I'm asking for exile. Remove the threat peacefully. Send her away where she can't endanger anyone. Exile is a death sentence, and you know it. Then perhaps Miss Vance should prove she's not a threat, a demonstration of control. If she truly has nothing to hide, fine, Elara said. Every eye turned to her. Draven's head snapped around. Elara, he's not going to stop, she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. No matter what you say, no matter how you defend me, he's going to keep pushing until he gets what he wants. So let's end this. She stepped forward, away from Lycia's protective position. I'll demonstrate control, right here, right now, and when I do, this matter is closed, permanently. Those are my terms. Oren's smile widened. Acceptable. And if you fail? I won't fail. But if you do? Elara's hands clenched into fists. Then I accept exile. Voluntary. Permanent. No appeals. Elara, no. Draven started to rise from the throne. She looked at him, and through the bond she pushed every ounce of certainty she didn't feel. Trust me. He hesitated, then, slowly, sat back down. Very well, Oren said. He gestured to the guards. Bring it in. The chamber doors opened. 4 guards entered, carrying between them a glass sphere the size of a large pumpkin. Inside the sphere, water churned and swirled, alive with unnatural movement. They set it carefully on a pedestal that had been wheeled into the center of the room. This is a containment sphere, Oren announced. Ancient magic, designed specifically to test magical control. The challenge is simple. He turned to Elara. Freeze the water inside, completely solid, without cracking the glass. Total control, perfect precision, no margin for error. Elara stared at the sphere, her heart hammering. She'd practiced freezing water, practiced for hours, but never in a container this delicate, never under this much pressure, never with hundreds of hostile eyes watching for the slightest mistake. If you succeed, Oren continued, I will withdraw my motion and never speak of this matter again. If you fail, if the glass cracks, if the water doesn't freeze completely, if anything goes wrong, you leave this kingdom immediately and never return. Do you accept these terms? Draven asked her. And through the bond she felt his fear for her, his desperate wish that she'd refuse. But there was no refusing. Not really. This had always been inevitable. I accept, Elara said. The room went deathly silent. She approached the sphere slowly, every eye tracking her movement. The water inside churned faster, responding to the magical tension saturating the air. She could feel it, the weight of expectation, fear, hope, and hatred, all pressing down on her like a physical force. Her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, took a breath, forced herself to focus. She could do this. She'd done it before, in the warded chamber with less pressure but the same principles. Find the power, direct it carefully, control the amount. Don't flood, don't trickle, steady stream. She placed her hands on either side of the glass sphere, careful not to touch it directly. Closed her eyes, reached inward. The well of power rose to meet her instantly, eager as always, wanting to surge forth and prove itself. Elara clamped down hard on it, forcing it into submission. Not yet. Not all of you. Just a thread. Just enough. She directed that thread down her arms, into her hands, toward the water trapped in the glass. The sphere began to glow faintly. Frost spread across the water's surface, delicate as spider silk, beautiful in its crystalline patterns. The churning slowed, the water grew sluggish, ice formed in spreading fractals, reaching inward from the edges. Elara held her breath, maintaining perfect focus. She couldn't afford even a moment's distraction. The power wanted to rush forward, wanted to freeze everything instantly, but she held it back with sheer force of will. The ice spread deeper. Halfway. 3/4. Someone in the crowd coughed, and Elara's concentration wavered for just a fraction of a second. The power surged. No! She pulled back hard, desperate to regain control before the water froze completely. The ice inside the sphere was perfectly clear, flawless as diamond, unmarred by cracks or bubbles. Every drop of water had been transformed into solid ice, and the glass was intact. Not a single crack, not even a scratch. Elara opened her eyes and nearly collapsed with relief. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to lock her knees to stay upright. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then someone in the back of the room began to clap. Another joined in, then another. Within seconds, half the chamber was applauding. Some genuinely impressed, others simply relieved the demonstration was over. But the other half stood in furious silence, their expressions making it clear they'd wanted her to fail. Elara stepped back from the sphere, her whole body trembling with exhaustion, and found Draven beside her instantly. He caught her elbow, steadying her, his grip warm and solid. You did it, he said quietly, and through the bond she felt his pride, fierce and absolute. I told you. Oren stared at the frozen sphere, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to face the council. The terms were clear. Draven announced before Oren could speak. She succeeded. The motion is withdrawn. This matter is permanently closed. For now, Oren said softly, loud enough only for those closest to hear. But power like that doesn't stay controlled forever. And when she finally breaks, and she will break, everyone will see that I was right all along. He turned and walked away, his supporters following. Elara stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by wolves who looked at her with everything from awe to terror to barely concealed hatred. She'd won the battle, but she could feel it through the bone-deep exhaustion and the shaking in her limbs and the power still simmering under her skin, eager for more. The war had only just begun, and something inside her was changing, growing, becoming something even she didn't fully understand yet, something that might save them all, or destroy everything. The victory lasted exactly 3 hours. Elara made it back to Draven's chambers before her legs gave out completely. The adrenaline that had kept her upright during the demonstration drained away all at once, leaving her hollow and shaking. She collapsed onto the nearest chair, her head in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. She'd done it. She'd proven control in front of the entire council. Oren had been forced to withdraw his motion. The purge law remained suspended. She should have felt relief, triumph even. Instead, she felt the weight of every hostile stare that had followed her out of the council chamber. The whispers that started the moment she turned her back. The way even some of Draven's supporters had looked at her, not with respect, but with fear barely concealed behind diplomatic masks. "You need to eat something," Licia said, appearing with a tray. The commander set it on the table with more force than necessary. "And drink water. You're pale as death." "I feel like death." "You look like it too. Eat anyway." Elara forced herself to pick up bread, though her stomach churned. "That didn't change anything, did it? I proved I could control it, and they still hate me." "Some of them," Lisha admitted, dropping into the chair across from her. "But some were impressed. I saw it. Young wolves especially. They were watching you like you were something out of legend." "That's almost worse. I don't want to be a legend. I just want to exist without everyone trying to kill me." "Well, that's not happening anytime soon." Licia's expression turned grim. Oren left the castle immediately after the vote, took 6 of his closest allies with him. They're heading to the Western Territories. Elara's head snapped up. Why? To rally support, to spread their version of what happened today, to build a coalition strong enough to challenge the king's authority. Licia leaned forward. "You won the battle, Elara, but you also just painted the biggest target imaginable on your back. And Oren's not the type to accept defeat gracefully." Before Elara could respond, the door burst open. Marcus strode in, his face flushed with anger. "We have a problem." "Of course we do," Licia muttered. "The Western packs are mobilizing. Lady Maren Voss just sent word. She's calling a gathering of all allied territories. Claims she needs to discuss the kingdom's future in light of recent concerning events." Marcus's voice dripped with sarcasm on the last part. "It's a coup in everything but name." Elara felt ice form in her stomach. "Because of me. Because she's ambitious and sees an opening." Draven appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Maren's been waiting for an excuse to challenge my authority for years. You just gave her the perfect one." "I'm sorry." "Don't." Draven crossed to her, his hand finding her shoulder. "This isn't your fault. Maren would have found another reason eventually. She's just using you as justification." "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "We go to the Western Territories before she can poison everyone against us." Draven's jaw clenched. "If Maren wants a confrontation, she'll get one. On my terms." "That's insane," Licia said flatly. "You'd be walking into hostile territory. She could have 50 wolves loyal to her, all waiting to what? Attack their king openly? That would be treason. Even Maren's not that bold." Draven released Elara's shoulder and turned to Marcus. "How long until we can assemble a traveling party?" 2 days. Maybe one if we push." "Push." "I want to reach the Western Territories before Oren does, before he has time to spread his poison." Draven looked at Elara. "And you're coming with me." "What?" "No, I'll just make things worse. You'll make things real," Draven interrupted. "Right now, you're a story Oren's telling, a monster he's building in people's imaginations. But if they meet you, see you, understand that you're not some demon, but a person. A person with unnatural magic who can freeze water with a thought, Elara said bitterly. That'll win them over. It might. If you let them see the truth instead of Oren's lies. His amber eyes were intense. I need you with me on this. The bond alone will force your presence anyway. I can't leave you behind without weakening myself significantly. But more than that, I need them to see that I trust you, that you're not a threat. Even though half of them think I am, especially because of that. Elara wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But the determination in Draven's expression stopped her. Fine, she said, but if they try to execute me again, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. They left at dawn 2 days later. The traveling party was smaller than Elara expected, just 20 wolves, including Draven, Lycia, Marcus, and Vala. Revan had wanted to come but was too old for the hard riding required. Instead, he'd loaded Vala down with books and scrolls about unbonded magic, insisting she continue Elara's training even on the road. The journey to the Western Territories would take 5 days of hard travel through increasingly wild country. The Western packs had always been more isolated, more traditional, more suspicious of the Crown's authority. Maren Voss ruled them with an iron fist, and her word carried more weight in those lands than Draven's crown. They rode in near silence that first day. The guards remained alert, hands never far from weapons. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats, and Elara felt the weight of suspicious stares from the soldiers who'd been forced to protect someone they feared. That night, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. Fires were built, watches established, and Elara found herself sitting alone at the edge of camp, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. You should eat. She turned to find one of the younger guards standing nearby, a boy who couldn't be more than 19, with nervous eyes and a bow slung across his back. I'm not hungry, Elara said. Lycia will have my head if I don't at least try to make you eat. He held out dried meat and bread. I'm Finn, by the way. I was there, at the council meeting, when you froze the sphere. Elara took the food reluctantly. And it was incredible. His eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. I've never seen anything like it. The way the ice spread, it was beautiful, like watching art happen in real time. She blinked, surprised. Most people think it was terrifying. Some people are idiots. Finn sat down, uninvited, but not unwelcome. My little sister is wolfless. She's 12, and the pack treats her like she's broken, like she's worthless because she can't shift. His voice grew quiet. When I saw what you did, how you proved that not having a wolf doesn't mean you're weak, I thought maybe there's hope for her. Maybe she's not broken either. Elara's throat tightened. I'm not a hero, Finn. I'm just trying to survive. That's what makes it matter more. You're not some legendary warrior born with power. You're someone who got handed an impossible situation and chose to fight instead of giving up. He stood, shouldering his bow. Anyway, eat. And thank you for showing people like my sister that they can be something too. He walked away before she could respond. Elara sat there, the bread and meat forgotten in her hands, feeling something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on the people who hated her that she'd forgotten there might be others, people who saw her existence as possibility instead of threat. It didn't make the danger less real, but somehow it made carrying it feel slightly less impossible. The attack came on the third night. Elara woke to the sound of screaming and the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in her bedroll, heart hammering, and saw chaos erupting around the camp. Wolves poured from the forest, at least 30 of them, all shifted, all snarling with coordinated fury. This wasn't a random attack. This was an ambush. Elara, get down! Lycia appeared out of nowhere, blade already drawn and dripping blood. She'd shifted partially, claws extended, her face more wolf than human. Elara dropped flat as a massive gray wolf sailed over her head, jaws snapping where her throat had been a second before. Lycia intercepted it midair, driving her blade into its flank. The wolf howled and retreated. They're after you specifically, Lycia snarled. They keep pushing through the defensive line toward your position. Someone hired them. Oren. Probably. Can you fight? I can try it. Then try. Lycia shoved a knife into her hand. And use your power if you have to. Screw the consequences. Staying alive matters more. She vanished back into the melee. Elara scrambled to her feet, knife gripped in white-knuckled hands, and tried to make sense of the chaos. The camp had dissolved into a nightmare of violence, wolves tearing into each other, guards fighting desperately against overwhelming numbers, blood staining the grass black in the firelight. She saw Finn go down, a wolf's claws raking across his back, saw Marcus shift completely, his massive brown wolf form tearing through two attackers, saw Draven at the center of it all, fighting with terrifying efficiency, his alpha power rolling off him in waves that made even his own guard stumble. Then she saw the wolf coming for her, huge, black, eyes fixed on her with single-minded purpose. Elara raised the knife, knowing it was inadequate, knowing she was about to die, but refusing to go down without a fight. The wolf lunged, and Alara's power exploded outward. She didn't consciously call it, didn't carefully measure or control it like Vala had taught her. Pure survival instinct triggered the magic, and it responded with devastating force. The ground beneath the wolf froze solid. Ice spread in a wave, catching 3 more attackers, their paws suddenly locked in place. The black wolf crashed down, unable to move, shock evident in its eyes. But Alara's power didn't stop there. The air grew frigid. Frost formed on grass and trees and weapons. Her breath misted in clouds. And the attackers closest to her began to slow, their movements sluggish, as if the cold itself was sapping their strength. "Elara, stop!" Vala's voice cut through the chaos. "You're losing control!" She was right. Elara could feel it, the power surging beyond her intention, feeding on her fear and rage, growing stronger with every second. The ice was spreading too fast, freezing too much. If she didn't pull it back, a hand caught her wrist. Warm, familiar. Draven. He was covered in blood, none of it his, she realized with relief, and his amber eyes blazed with intensity. "Look at me," he commanded. "Just me. Feel the bond." Elara focused on him, on the thread connecting them, and felt his presence like an anchor, steady, controlled, strong. "Pull it back," he said quietly. "Not all at once, gradually, like we practiced." She tried, reached for the power flooding outward and pulled, fought against its momentum, forced it back into herself. The ice stopped spreading. The cold began to recede. The attackers who could still move retreated, melting back into the forest. The ones caught in ice remained frozen, trapped until someone decided to free them. Alara's legs gave out. Draven caught her, lowering her gently to the ground. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean to. It just happened." "You saved lives," Draven interrupted. "Half our guards would be dead if you hadn't stopped those wolves. Don't apologize for surviving." Around them, the camp slowly came back to life. Guards checked the injured, counted the dead, secured the prisoners frozen in ice. The damage assessment was brutal. 3 guards dead, twice that many injured. Finn was alive but badly hurt, and the attackers had been specifically targeting Elara. "This was coordinated," Marcus said, limping over with a gash across his ribs. "Professional. They knew exactly where we'd camp, exactly how many guards we had, exactly where Elara would be positioned." "Someone in our party is feeding information to Oren," Lycia said grimly. "Or Marin," Draven added. "She has as much to gain from Elara dying as Oren does." "What do we do?" Elara asked. Draven's expression hardened. "We keep moving, but from now on we assume everyone who isn't in this immediate circle is a potential threat." He stood, helping Elara to her feet, and addressed the guards. "Check everyone for injuries. We move out in 2 hours, and someone thaw those prisoners, carefully. I want them alive for questioning." As the camp scrambled to obey, Vala appeared at Elara's side. "Your power is growing stronger, faster than I expected. Is that bad?" "It's dangerous. The more you use it, especially in moments of high emotion, the more it wants to be used. You're feeding it, making it stronger." Vala's voice dropped. "You need to be very careful, Elara, because the line between controlled power and consuming fire is thinner than you think." "So what am I supposed to do? Not use it? Let people die?" "No. But you need to understand the cost. Every time you tap into that well, you make it deeper, vaster, and eventually you might not be able to pull yourself back out." The words settled over Elara like a curse. Well, they reached the Western Territories 4 days later, later than planned because of the attack and the injured they were forced to transport. The landscape had changed dramatically. Gone were the cultivated lands and organized settlements of the capital region. Here, the wilderness dominated, dense forests, steep hills, rivers that ran wild and untamed. The Western Pacts had always lived closer to nature, rejecting what they saw as the capital's soft, corrupted ways. Marin Voss's stronghold sat atop a hill overlooking a valley. It wasn't a castle, more like a fortified compound, all wood and stone and practical defenses. Guards watched from the walls, their eyes tracking the approaching party with open suspicion. "Friendly place," Elara muttered. "Marin doesn't do friendly," Draven replied. "She does strong, respected, feared. Everything else is weakness." They were met at the gates by a delegation led by a massive wolf of a man with scars crossing his face and arms thick as tree trunks. "Alpha King," he said, his tone just barely respectful enough to avoid insult. "Lady Marin awaits you in the Great Hall." "I'm sure she does," Draven said dryly. The Great Hall was exactly what Elara expected. Large, practical, decorated with weapons and hunting trophies instead of art. 50 wolves at least filled the space, all of them watching with varying degrees of hostility as Draven's party entered. And at the far end, seated in a chair that was definitely not a throne, but might as well have been, sat Lady Marin Voss. She was in her 40s, Elara guessed, with auburn hair streaked with silver and eyes like chips of green ice. She wore practical clothes, leather and wool, but carried herself with the authority of someone who'd fought for every scrap of power she held and wouldn't give it up without a fight. "Your Majesty," Marin said, rising. "What an unexpected pleasure." "I thought it was time we talked," Draven replied, face to face, without messengers distorting the conversation. "How refreshingly direct." Marin's eyes slid to Elara. "And you brought your pet." The room went deathly quiet. "Careful," Draven said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register. "You're addressing someone under my direct protection." "Am I? I'm addressing the wolfless girl who can freeze armed wolves solid with a thought. The abomination who somehow convinced you to bind your life to hers." Marin smiled, sharp as broken glass. "Tell me, Your Majesty, is it true love, or did she enchant you?" "Enough." Draven stepped forward, and power rolled off him. "You wanted to discuss the kingdom's future. Fine. Let's discuss it. But you will show respect, or this conversation is over." "Respect?" Marin laughed. "You want me to respect the fact that you've tied your fate to something that violates every natural law we hold sacred? That you're risking the stability of the entire kingdom for a girl who should have been drowned at birth?" Elara felt the words like physical blows. But before she could respond, someone else spoke. "I'll challenge that." Everyone turned. A young woman had stepped forward from the crowd, maybe 25, with dark hair and determined eyes. "I'm Kira, 4th ranked in Lady Marin's pack, and I formally challenge the accusation that Elara Vance should have been killed." Murmurs rippled through the hall. "On what grounds?" Marin asked, her tone icy. "On the grounds that wolfless doesn't mean worthless. That power outside traditional forms doesn't mean corruption." Kira's voice grew stronger. "I watched the reports from the capital. She saved a child from fire. She demonstrated perfect control in front of the council. She's done nothing to warrant death except exist differently than us." "She's unbonded," someone shouted from the crowd. "The old laws were written by people who murdered an entire bloodline out of fear," Kira shot back. "Are we really going to follow the example of genocidal cowards?" The hall erupted into chaos. Wolves shouted at each other, some agreeing with Kira, others calling for her silence. Marin watched it all with calculating eyes. Then she raised her hand and silence fell instantly. "Interesting," Marin said. "It seems opinion is divided. Perhaps we should settle this definitively." She turned to Elara. "You claim you're not dangerous. Prove it. Fight me. Hand to hand. No weapons, no magic, just skill. If you win, I'll support the king's position. If you lose..." She smiled. "Well, that will answer the question of whether you deserve protection." "This is absurd," Draven said. "Elara's not a warrior." "Then she shouldn't be in the center of kingdom politics," Marin interrupted. "If she's weak, she's a liability. If she's strong, she'll survive. Either way, we'll know the truth." "And if I refuse?" Elara asked, finding her voice. "Then I call for a vote right now. Every alpha in this room decides whether to support the king or demand your exile. Based on the mood I'm sensing." Marin gestured to the hostile faces surrounding them. I don't think you'll like the outcome. Elara looked at Draven. Through the bond, she felt his fury and his helplessness. He couldn't protect her from this without looking weak. Couldn't refuse the challenge without losing the support he'd come here to secure. How long do I have to prepare? Elara asked. Marin's smile widened. 1 hour. Yum. This is suicide, Lisha said for the 5th time. They were in a side room, preparing, and the commander looked like she wanted to murder someone, preferably Marin. She's got 40 pounds on you, a decade of combat experience, and the kind of ruthlessness that comes from fighting your way to the top of a cutthroat pack. You're going to get destroyed. Probably, Elara agreed. Her hands were shaking as she tightened the wraps around them. But what choice do I have? You could use your magic, level the playing field, and prove every fear they have about me being uncontrollable and dangerous? No. If I'm going to do this, I do it their way. Elara met Lisha's eyes. You taught me how to fight. Taught me to trust my instincts, to use leverage instead of strength. I just need to do that. For a few minutes, against someone twice as skilled as me. When you put it that way, it sounds even worse. Lycia, Draven appeared in the doorway. Give us a moment. The commander hesitated, then nodded and left. Draven crossed to Elara, and the concern in his expression made her chest ache. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. We both know it. If she hurts you, she will hurt me. That's kind of the point of fighting. Elara tried to smile and failed. But I'll hurt her back. And maybe if I'm very lucky and she underestimates me, I'll last long enough to not be completely humiliated. Elara, I'm scared, she interrupted. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people fight my battles. So I'm going to walk into that hall, and I'm going to face someone who wants me dead, and I'm going to prove that I'm not weak, even if it kills me. Draven pulled her against his chest, and for a moment they just stood there, the bond humming between them. Don't die, he said quietly. That's an order from your king. I'll do my best, Your Majesty. The hour passed too quickly. The great hall had been cleared, a fighting circle marked in the center with a rope. Every wolf in the compound had crowded in to watch, packing the space until there was barely room to breathe. The air thrummed with anticipation and bloodlust. Elara stepped into the circle wearing only a simple tunic and pants, her hands wrapped, her hair pulled back. Across from her, Marin entered wearing the same, muscles rippling under her skin, confidence radiating from every movement. Rules are simple, Marin announced. No shifting, no weapons, no magic. Fight until one of us yields or can't continue. She turned to Elara. Any questions? Just one, Elara said. What happens if I win? Marin laughed. Adorable, but hypothetically, if you somehow manage to defeat me, which you won't, I would publicly support your right to exist and throw my considerable influence behind the king. Satisfied? Very. Then let's begin. Marin moved like lightning. One moment she was standing across the circle. The next, she was right there, fist driving toward Elara's face with enough force to shatter bone. Elara dropped and rolled, barely avoiding the strike. She came up and threw a punch of her own, clumsy, desperate, that Marin blocked without effort. Pathetic, Marin said, and drove her knee into Elara's ribs. Pain exploded through Elara's side. She stumbled back, gasping, and Marin pressed the advantage. A punch to the shoulder, a sweep that nearly took Elara's legs out, an elbow that grazed her temple hard enough to make stars burst across her vision. Elara was outmatched, completely, utterly. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution dragged out for entertainment. She went down, hard, tasted blood. Stay down, Marin advised. You've proven you're brave, stupid but brave. Don't die for pride. Elara pushed herself up on shaking arms. Not done yet. Yes, you are. You just don't know it. Marin came in for the finishing blow, a strike aimed at Elara's temple that would knock her unconscious and end this humiliation. And Elara remembered what Lycia had taught her. Don't fight their fight, fight yours. She didn't try to block the strike. Instead, she moved into it, inside Marin's reach, too close for the older woman to generate power. Grabbed Marin's wrist, used her own momentum against her, twisted and threw her weight backward. They both went down. But Elara landed on top. For one shocked second, neither moved. Then Elara drove her elbow into Marin's face with every ounce of strength she had left. Blood sprayed. Marin's head snapped back, and Elara rolled away before the Alpha could recover, scrambling to her feet with her vision swimming and her ribs screaming. Marin stood slowly, blood streaming from her nose, her expression murderous. "Lucky shot," she growled. She attacked again, faster, angrier, no longer underestimating her opponent. Elara couldn't match her, couldn't beat her, but she could survive. Could dodge and weave and take hits on her arms instead of her head. Could use every dirty trick Licia had taught her, going for eyes, throat, joints. She fought like someone with nothing to lose, because she didn't. Minutes passed. Could have been 5, could have been 50. Elara lost track. Everything narrowed to the next strike, the next breath, the next second of staying conscious. Blood ran into her eyes. Her ribs were definitely cracked. Her left hand wasn't working right, but she was still standing, and Marin was breathing hard, favoring her right leg where Elara had landed a lucky kick. "Enough!" someone shouted. Elara blinked through the blood and saw Draven at the edge of the circle, his expression carved from rage. "This has gone on long enough." "No," Elara gasped. "Not done." "Yes, you are," Marin said. But there was something different in her tone now. Not contempt. Something closer to respect. "You've made your point. You're not weak. You're stubborn and resourceful and tougher than you look. That's enough. Does that mean you'll support?" "It means I won't actively work to destroy you," Marin interrupted, "which in this political climate is the best you're going to get from me." She extended her hand. "You've earned that much." Elara stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, she took it. The hall erupted, some wolves cheering, others shouting in outrage. But Marin's word carried weight here, and everyone knew it. Elara had survived, barely, but survived. Draven was at her side instantly, steadying her as her legs finally gave out. "You're an idiot," he said, but his voice was thick with something that might have been pride or fear, or both. "You're idiot," Elara managed, then passed out. She woke 3 hours later in a guest room, her entire body screaming in protest. Vala sat beside the bed, reading by candlelight. "How bad?" Elara croaked. 3 cracked ribs, concussion, multiple contusions, a sprained wrist. Vala set down her book. "You'll live, though you'll wish you hadn't for the next few days." "Did it work? Did we get Marin's support?" "You got her neutrality, which, as she said, is the best anyone could hope for. Oren's messengers arrived an hour after your fight and tried to rally support against Draven. Marin shut them down publicly, told them anyone who wanted to challenge the king would have to go through her first." Vala smiled slightly. "You impressed her, impressed a lot of people." "Great. I feel so victorious." "You should. You survived something designed to break you, and you did it without using your power, which means no one can claim you're dangerous or uncontrolled." Vala's expression grew serious. "But Elara, this isn't over. Oren's building something, moving pieces into place. The attack on the road, the challenge here, these are tests, probing for weakness." "What's he planning?" "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's going to be worse than anything we've faced so far." Before Elara could respond, the door burst open. Marcus stumbled in, his face pale. "We need the king, now. There's been an attack." "Where?" Vala demanded. "The capital, while we were gone. Someone bombed the eastern wing, what was left of it, and they're claiming Elara did it, that her magic is unstable and dangerous and she needs to be put down before she destroys the kingdom." Alara's blood turned to ice. "It's a trap," Vala said. "They're trying to force Draven to choose between defending Elara and defending his capital." "It's working," Marcus said grimly. "Half the council is calling for her immediate execution, and Oren just declared himself acting regent until the king's judgment is restored." "That's treason," Elara said. "That's a coup." Marcus looked at her with something close to pity. "And you're the justification for it." The room spun. Everything they'd fought for, everything Elara had bled for, it was all falling apart. And somewhere in the capital, Oren was smiling, knowing he'd finally found the perfect weapon to destroy them both. The room tilted sideways, and Elara gripped the bed frame to keep from falling. Every injury from the fight with Marin screamed in protest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ice spreading through her chest. "How many dead?" Draven's voice cut through her panic. He'd appeared in the doorway behind Marcus, still wearing traveling clothes, his face a mask of controlled fury. 12 confirmed, maybe more buried in the rubble. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. And Councilor Brennan is missing. They're saying she was investigating the Eastern Wing when it exploded. Brennan was one of my strongest supporters, Draven said quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. Oren didn't just bomb a building. He eliminated a political obstacle and framed Elara for it in one move. We need to get back to the capital, Leisha said, pushing into the already crowded room. Now, before Oren consolidates more power. It's a 3-day ride, Marcus pointed out. He'll have that time to spread his version of events, to turn the entire kingdom against me, Elara finished. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. He's already won, hasn't he? Even if we prove I was here when the explosion happened, even if we show I couldn't possibly have done it, people will believe what they want to believe. And they want to believe I'm dangerous. No. Draven crossed to her, his hands finding her shoulders, his amber eyes blazing. He hasn't won. Not yet. But we need to move fast and we need to be smart about this. Smart how? Vala asked. Oren has the capital. He's declared himself acting regent. Half the council is probably too terrified to oppose him. What's our move here? Draven was silent for a long moment. Then his expression shifted, hardening into something Elara had never seen before. Not just determination, but calculated ruthlessness. We don't go back to the capital, he said. Everyone started talking at once. That's insane. You're the king. You can't just abandon. Oren will claim you've abdicated. Quiet! Draven's voice cracked like a whip. Silence fell instantly. I said we don't go back to the capital. I didn't say we were giving up. He turned to Marcus. How many territories have we secured support from? Real support, not just polite promises. Marcus frowned, thinking. Western territories are neutral now, thanks to Marin. Northern pacts have always been loyal. Eastern territories are split, some for you, some for Oren. Southern pacts are waiting to see which way the wind blows. So we have maybe 40% of the kingdom solidly behind us. Oren probably has 30%, and the remaining 30% are sitting on the fence, waiting to back the winner. Draven's jaw clenched. We need to force their hand. Make them choose sides before Oren can poison them against us. How? Elara asked. By doing what Oren can't. By proving that you're not a threat. You're an asset. He looked at her intently. The explosion destroyed the Eastern Wing, again. That wing houses the castle's main food stores, the armory, and most of the guest quarters. Winter's coming in 2 months. Without those stores, the capital will starve before spring. You want to rebuild it, Vala said slowly, using Elara's power. Not just rebuild, transform it. Show the kingdom what unbonded magic can do when it's used for creation instead of destruction. Draven's voice grew more certain. If Elara can demonstrate that her power can save lives, feed families, protect people, Oren's narrative collapses. He can't claim she's dangerous if she's the one keeping the kingdom alive. That's brilliant, Leisha said, and completely insane. She's never attempted anything on that scale before. I've never attempted anything, period, Elara pointed out. I've been lighting candles and freezing bowls of water. You want me to reconstruct an entire wing of the castle? I want you to prove what you're capable of, Draven said. Not for them. Not even for me. For yourself. Because I think you don't realize how powerful you actually are. Through the bond, Elara felt his absolute conviction, his unshakable belief that she could do this. She wished she shared it. Even if I could, she said carefully, how does that help? Oren controls the capital. We'd need access to the site, materials, workers. He's not going to just let us waltz in and we don't ask permission. Draven's smile was sharp as broken glass. We gather supporters. We march to the capital in force, and we dare Oren to stop us from helping the kingdom he claims to be protecting. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's either genius or suicide. Probably both, Draven admitted. But it's the only play we have. Oren wants a war? We'll give him one, but we'll fight it on our terms with our weapon. He looked at Elara. What do you say? Want to save a kingdom that spent the last month trying to kill you? Elara should have said no. Should have pointed out all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Should have reminded him that she could barely control her power under ideal conditions, let alone under the pressure of performing in front of thousands of hostile witnesses. But the memory of Finn's words echoed in her mind, about his sister, about how seeing Elara fight had given the girl hope. And Elara realized she was tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of letting other people define what she was capable of. "All right," she said, "let's do something incredibly stupid." Lycia groaned. "I hate everything about this plan." "Noted," Draven said. "Now let's move. We have 3 days to gather an army and plan an impossible construction project. And someone get a healer in here. Elara needs to be able to ride." They left Marin's compound within hours, but not before securing something Elara hadn't expected: volunteers. Kira, the young wolf who'd defended Elara in the Great Hall, stepped forward first. "I'm coming with you." "This isn't your fight," Draven said. "Yes, it is. I've got family in the capital. If they starve because some power-hungry bastard blew up the food stores, that's my problem." She crossed her arms. "Plus, I want to see what the wolfless girl can really do." "You might be disappointed," Elara muttered. "I doubt it." 8 more wolves from Marin's pack joined them. Then, as word spread about what they were planning, others appeared. Wolves from nearby territories, travelers who'd heard the news, even some merchants whose livelihoods depended on the capital's stability. By the time they made camp that first night, their party had swelled to nearly 50. "People are angry," Marcus reported, sitting by the fire. "Not at you, at Oren. Word spreading about the explosion, and not everyone believes his version of events. Some are calling him a tyrant. Others say he staged the whole thing to justify a coup." "Are they right?" Elara asked. "Did he blow up his own people just to frame me? Probably. Oren's ambitious, but he's not stupid. He knew we'd be in the Western Territories when it happened. Knew you'd have witnesses proving you were nowhere near the capital." Marcus poked the fire with a stick. "Which means he doesn't actually care if people believe you did it. He just needs the accusation to exist, to keep people scared and divided." "So how do we fight that?" "We don't. We make the accusation irrelevant." Marcus looked up, and there was something fierce in his expression. "If you can rebuild that wing, if you can show people what your power can actually do, it won't matter what Oren says. Actions speak louder than lies." Elara hoped he was right. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her injuries had been treated by a traveling healer, ribs wrapped, concussion managed with herbs that made her head feel slightly less like it was splitting open, but the pain kept her awake. Or maybe it was the fear. She sat at the edge of camp, staring into the darkness, and felt the enormity of what she'd agreed to settle over her like a weight. Rebuild an entire wing, feed a kingdom, prove she wasn't dangerous. All while Oren worked to destroy everything she'd fought for. "You're thinking too loud again." Elara turned to find Draven settling beside her, 2 cups of something hot in his hands. He offered one to her. "Tea," he said. "Vala's blend. Helps with pain and overthinking." "I don't know if there's enough tea in the world for how much I'm overthinking right now." But she took the cup anyway, grateful for the warmth. "What if I can't do it? What if I try to rebuild that wing and I just make things worse?" "Then we'll deal with it, together." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." Draven stared into his own cup. "I've been king for 5 years. 5 years of making impossible choices, balancing competing interests, trying to hold a fractured kingdom together through sheer force of will. And you know what I've learned?" "What?" "That failure is inevitable. You can't save everyone, can't fix everything, can't prevent every disaster." He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was staggering. "But you can show up anyway. You can try, even when the odds are terrible and the consequences of failure are catastrophic. Because the alternative, giving up, letting fear paralyze you, that guarantees failure. So your advice is to try and probably fail?" "My advice is to try and maybe succeed. There's a difference." He paused. "The bond we share, it's changed me. Made me more aware of my own emotions, my own fears. I can't hide from them the way I used to. And you know what that's taught me?" "What?" "That you're the strongest person I've ever met. Not because of your magic. Because every single day you wake up in a world that wants you dead, and you choose to keep fighting anyway. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary." Elara's throat tightened. "I don't feel extraordinary. I feel terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. Just don't let it stop you from being who you're meant to be. He stood, offering his hand. Come on. You need sleep. Tomorrow we start gathering materials and planning the construction. And you need to practice with Vala. Large-scale magic is different from lighting candles. Elara let him pull her to her feet, and they walked back to camp in comfortable silence, the bond humming between them like a promise. The next 2 days were a blur of desperate preparation. Vala worked with Elara every spare moment, pushing her to think bigger, to imagine her power on a scale she'd never attempted before. They practiced in clearings away from the camp, where accidental explosions wouldn't hurt anyone. You need to stop thinking of your magic as something you do, Vala explained. Start thinking of it as something you are. It's not separate from you, it's part of your essence. And when you're rebuilding that wing, you won't have time to carefully measure and control every action. You'll need to trust your instincts. My instincts involve panicking and freezing everything around me. Then we work on better instincts. Vala gestured to a pile of stones. Build me a wall, 10 feet high, 5 feet wide, stable enough to support weight. I don't know how to... Yes, you do. You know what a wall looks like. You know what stability feels like. Your power responds to intent. So intend it. Build it. Elara stared at the stones, doubt churning in her stomach. But she reached for that well of power inside her, focused on what she wanted. Not the mechanics of how to stack stones, but the concept of a wall, solid and strong and protective. The power surged. The stones lifted into the air, tumbling over each other, seeking their places. They stacked themselves haphazardly at first, then with increasing precision, as if the magic itself was learning what stability meant. In less than a minute, a wall stood before them. It was rough, uneven in places, definitely not something a master mason would be proud of. But it was standing. Holy, Elara stared at what she'd created. I just did that. I actually just built a wall. You did, and with practice you'll build better walls, faster, more efficiently. Vala smiled. Your power is responding to large-scale intent better than I expected. The Unbonded weren't just fighters, Elara. They were builders, creators, protectors of communities. This is what your magic was meant for. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elara felt something other than fear when she thought about her power. She felt possibility, doubt. They reached the capital on the 4th day to find it in chaos. The eastern wing was worse than Elara had imagined. The explosion had collapsed not just the remaining structure from the fire, but had cratered the foundation itself. Stone and timber lay scattered across 100 yards, some pieces still smoking. The smell of death hung in the air. Bodies were still being pulled from the rubble. But what shocked Elara was the crowd. Hundreds of people lined the streets leading to the castle. Common wolves, merchants, servants, families with children. And they weren't hostile, they were desperate. Please, a woman called out, clutching a baby to her chest. They're saying the food stores are gone, that we'll starve before help comes. Is it true? We're here to help, Draven called back. I give you my word, no one will starve. How? Someone else shouted. The council's doing nothing. Oren says we should ration what's left and wait for spring shipments, but that's 6 months away. We're going to rebuild, Draven said. His voice carried, strong and clear. Starting today. Starting now. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Rebuild what? There's nothing left to rebuild. Then we build something new, Draven gestured to Elara. And we do it together. All eyes turned to her. Elara forced herself to stand straight despite her injuries, despite the terror clawing at her throat. She looked at the ruined wing, at the impossible task ahead, and felt the weight of hundreds of lives depending on what happened next. Clear the area, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Anyone not helping with construction needs to back up at least 50 yards. This is going to be unpredictable. The crowd hesitated, then slowly began to move. You sure about this? Licia asked quietly. No, but we're doing it anyway. Draven moved to stand beside her, Marcus and Licia flanking them, Vala positioning herself where she could intervene if things went wrong. The volunteers who'd traveled with them spread out, ready to assist however they could. And Elara looked at the destruction and tried to imagine it whole. She closed her eyes, reached for that well of power. But this time, she didn't pull carefully or cautiously. She opened herself to it completely, let it fill her until she could barely tell where she ended, and the magic began. The power roared forth, stone trembled, debris shifted, and slowly, impossibly, pieces began to move. Elara's mind became the blueprint. She thought of foundations, stable and deep, thought of walls, strong and protective, thought of a structure that could shelter hundreds, store food for thousands, stand for generations. And the magic responded. Stones lifted from the rubble, cleaned themselves of ash and blood, and flew to their positions. Timber that wasn't too damaged straightened and locked into place. The foundation filled itself, layer by layer, solid as bedrock. Elara opened her eyes and saw it happening. Not in her imagination, but in reality. The eastern wing was rebuilding itself. The crowd gasped. Some fell to their knees, others wept, and Elara kept working. It was exhausting in a way she'd never experienced. Not physical tiredness, but something deeper, like she was pouring pieces of herself into the structure, infusing it with her will, her determination, her desperate need to prove that her power could create instead of destroy. Minutes passed, or hours. Elara lost track of time. The only thing that mattered was the work, the building, the transformation of chaos into order. When she finally stopped, when the power finally receded and she could think again, she looked up and saw what she'd created. The eastern wing stood complete. Not exactly as it had been before. This was different, stronger, with foundations that went deeper and walls that would withstand anything short of direct magical assault. But it was whole, functional, beautiful even in its stark practicality. And the crowd was silent. Elara swayed, her legs giving out. Draven caught her before she hit the ground. "You did it," he said, and his voice was thick with wonder. "You actually did it. Did I do it right?" She could barely keep her eyes open. "Is it safe?" "Marcus, check it," Draven ordered. The big man approached the rebuilt wing cautiously, ran his hands along the walls, tested the doors, disappeared inside for what felt like an eternity. When he emerged, his expression was stunned. "It's perfect. Better than perfect. The foundations are deeper than they were before. The walls are reinforced. The storage rooms are not only intact, they're expanded. This could shelter twice as many people as the original structure." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others cried. Parents held their children and thanked whatever gods they believed in. And slowly, people began approaching, not with fear, but with gratitude. "Thank you," the woman with the baby said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us. You saved my daughter." Others echoed her. A steady stream of people offering thanks, touching the walls Elara had created, staring at her with something that looked almost like reverence. And through it all, Elara felt something shift. Not in the crowd, though that was shifting too, but in herself. That constant fear that had lived in her chest since the moment she'd woken up bound to the king, it was still there, but smaller now, quieter. Because she'd just proven that she wasn't what they'd called her. She wasn't an abomination or a curse or a mistake. She was a builder, a protector, someone whose existence made the world better, not worse. "We need to move," Lisa said urgently. "Oren's going to hear about this. He'll respond." "Let him," Draven said. "Let him try to claim she's dangerous after what everyone just witnessed. Let him try to turn people against the girl who just saved them from starvation." As if summoned by his words, guards appeared at the far end of the street, 20 of them, all wearing Oren's colors, all armed, and at their center walked Councilor Oren himself. His expression was calm, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. He surveyed the rebuilt wing, the grateful crowd, Elara standing exhausted but victorious in the center of it all. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying. "Truly impressive. The girl has power. We all knew that. The question was never whether she had power, it was whether she could control it." He paused. "And whether we, as a kingdom, want to become dependent on someone whose magic violates every natural law we hold sacred." "She just saved thousands of lives," Draven said coldly. "Today. But what about tomorrow? What happens when she loses control? When that power turns destructive instead of creative?" Oren looked at the crowd. "Do you really want to bind yourselves to someone who could obliterate everything she just built with a single moment of anger or fear?" Doubt flickered across some faces. "That's not going to happen," Elara said, forcing herself to stand without Draven's support. "Because I'm not what you keep saying I am. I'm not unstable. I'm not dangerous. I'm just different. And different doesn't mean wrong. Perhaps. But history says otherwise. The Unbonded were exterminated for a reason. They were murdered, Kira interrupted, pushing through the crowd. Genocided by people who were too afraid to let anyone exist outside their narrow definition of acceptable. Don't dress up mass murder as justice. The law was written by cowards and enforced by butchers. Kira's voice grew stronger. And I, for one, am done pretending that old evil should dictate present choices. She looked at the crowd. This girl just saved our lives, our children's lives. And he, she pointed at Oren, wants to kill her for it. Is that really the kingdom we want to be? Silence. Then slowly people began to nod. No, someone said. Then another. Then a dozen voices building into a chorus. No, she saved us. She's a hero. Oren's calm mask cracked. You're making a mistake, all of you. When this power turns against you, and it will, remember that I tried to warn you. The only thing turning against us is you, Draven said. You bombed your own people, murdered council members, declared yourself regent without authority. That's treason, Oren. And the penalty is death. You'll have to prove it first. Oren smiled, cold and confident. And good luck with that. I've covered my tracks well. He turned to his guards. We're leaving, but this isn't over, not by a long way. They departed, leaving tense silence in their wake. He's right, Marcus said quietly. We can't prove he set the explosion, and without proof, half the council will side with him out of fear or political convenience. Then we don't rely on proof, Draven said. We rely on momentum. Elara just won the people. Now we win the territories. One by one, we show them what she can do. Build infrastructure, solve problems, make ourselves indispensable. He looked at Elara. Think you can handle more impossible construction projects? Elara thought about the exhaustion weighing down her bones, about the risk of losing control, about all the ways this could still go catastrophically wrong. Then she thought about the woman's baby, about Finn's sister, about all the people who needed someone to prove that different wasn't dangerous. Yes, she said, I can handle it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she actually believed it. Over the next 3 weeks, they traveled the kingdom. The northern territories needed bridges repaired after spring flooding. Elara built them in a day, stone structures that would last centuries, strong enough to support heavy carts and large wolves. The eastern settlements needed wells dug deeper, water sources secured before winter. Elara reached into the earth itself, found the underground rivers, and brought them to the surface in controlled springs. The southern packs needed fortifications against bandits. Elara raised walls that no conventional force could breach, designed with strategic positions that gave defenders every advantage. Everywhere they went, the pattern repeated. Oren's messengers would arrive first, spreading fear and doubt. Then Elara would demonstrate what her power could actually do. And slowly, territory by territory, the kingdom began to shift. People still feared her, but now they needed her more than they feared her. And need, Draven explained, was the foundation of political power. You're not just rebuilding structures, Vala said one night as they made camp between territories. You're rebuilding yourself, creating a new identity. You're not the wolfless girl anymore. You're the unbonded, the builder, the one who saves instead of destroys. Oren's not going to give up, Elara said. No, but his position weakens every day you prove him wrong. And eventually, he'll have to make a move. Something desperate, and when he does, Vala smiled grimly, we'll be ready. The move came sooner than expected. They were in the southern territories, finishing work on a defensive wall, when Finn came running. Attack, he gasped. The capital. Oren's made his move. He's got forces surrounding the castle, claiming the king abandoned his post and has no right to rule. He's calling for a formal challenge, trial by combat for the throne. Elara's blood went cold. When? 3 days from now. He's given Draven 3 days to return and fight, or abdicate. It's a trap, Lisha said immediately. He wouldn't call for trial by combat unless he had something planned, some way to guarantee victory. Doesn't matter, Draven said, his voice hard. If I don't answer the challenge, I lose the throne by default. The law is clear. An alpha who won't defend his position doesn't deserve to hold it. So we go back, Marcus said. We fight. We go back, Draven agreed, but we don't fight alone. He looked at the Southern Pack's leaders who'd been watching the wall construction. I need to know, when this comes down to it, when Oren forces a choice, which side are you on? The Alpha of the Southern Pack stepped forward. He was old, scarred, with gray in his muzzle and eyes that had seen too much. You came here when we needed help. Didn't demand tribute or loyalty first, just helped, because that's what a real king does. He inclined his head. You have our support. Every wolf in the south who can fight will stand with you. Other pack leaders echoed the sentiment. One by one, territories that had been neutral declared themselves for Draven. By the time they finished, nearly 2/3 of the kingdom had chosen sides, and they'd chosen Elara's. This is it, Draven said as they prepared to ride for the capital. The final confrontation. Whatever Oren's planning, whatever trap he's set, we face it together, and we end this, one way or another. Elara looked at the rebuilt wall, at the grateful faces of wolves she'd helped, at the growing army of supporters who'd chosen to stand with them despite the risk. She thought about this girl she'd been a month ago, invisible, powerless, convinced she was nothing. That girl was gone. Dead. Burned away in fire and reforged in ice. What stood in her place was something new, something the kingdom had never seen before. And when they rode for the capital, with an army at their backs and certainty in their hearts, Elara knew with absolute conviction, whatever came next, she was ready. The war for the kingdom's soul was about to reach its climax. And this time, she wasn't running. They arrived at the capital as the sun set on the second day, and the sight that greeted them made Elara's breath catch. The city was divided. On one side of the main plaza stood Oren's forces, perhaps 300 wolves, all armed, all wearing his colors. They'd barricaded the castle gates and positioned archers on the walls. It was a show of strength designed to intimidate, to make clear that Oren held the physical power here. On the other side, spilling out from the rebuilt eastern wing and filling the streets beyond, stood the people. Thousands of them. Common wolves, merchants, families, the ones Elara had saved. They weren't armed with swords or organized into military formations, but they were there, a living wall between Oren's forces and the road, and they were chanting her name. Elara, 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 Elara. The sound rolled over her like thunder, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't process the sheer weight of it, all these people who'd decided she was worth defending. Well, Leisha said dryly, looks like you've got some fans. Looks like we've got leverage, Draven corrected. His expression was grim but satisfied. Oren can't attack us without going through them, and if he orders his wolves to cut down unarmed civilians, he loses whatever political legitimacy he has left. So what do we do? Marcus asked. We talk. Draven dismounted and Elara followed suit along with their inner circle. Let's see what terms Oren's offering and what he's really after. They pushed through the crowd, which parted for them eagerly, people reaching out to touch Elara's cloak, her hands, murmuring prayers and thanks, until they reached the neutral ground in the center of the plaza. Oren was already there, flanked by 6 of his most loyal council members. He looked tired, Elara noticed. There were shadows under his eyes and new lines around his mouth. The last month hadn't been easy for him either. Your Majesty, Oren said, his tone mocking the title. How generous of you to return. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your throne entirely. I was securing my kingdom, Draven said coldly. Something you'd know nothing about, considering you've been busy trying to steal it. Steal? I prevented chaos. When you disappeared, someone needed to maintain order. Oren gestured to his forces. I've kept the peace, protected the capital, done the job you abandoned. You bombed the eastern wing and blamed an innocent girl for it, Draven said. That's not keeping peace. That's terrorism. Prove it. I don't need to prove it. Everyone knows what you did. Knowing and proving are different things. And without proof, Oren smiled. I'm just a concerned council member doing his duty during a crisis, while you were gallivanting across the kingdom with your pet witch. The crowd behind Elara growled, literally growled, a wave of sound from hundreds of throats that made even Oren's guards shift nervously. Careful, Draven said softly. They don't seem to appreciate that characterization. The mob's opinion is irrelevant. What matters is the law, which brings us to why we're here. Oren straightened, projecting his voice so everyone could hear. I have issued a formal challenge for leadership of this kingdom, trial by combat, as is traditional. The winner takes the throne. The loser... He shrugged. Well, the loser won't need to worry about politics anymore. I accept your challenge, Draven said immediately. Wait. Oren's smile widened. I haven't finished explaining the terms. You see, this challenge isn't just about physical strength. It's about fitness to rule, and your fitness has been called into question by your unfortunate attachment to the unbonded girl. Elara's stomach dropped. So here are my terms, Oren continued. We fight, but not alone. You bring your champion, your bound mate, your greatest weapon, the girl whose power you've been using to buy loyalty across the kingdom, and I bring mine. Who? Draven asked, though there was tension in his voice now. Oren gestured, and the crowd behind him parted. A figure stepped forward, and Elara's blood turned to ice. The woman was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, built like a warrior, with scars covering her exposed arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. But what made Elara's breath catch wasn't her size or her obvious strength. It was her eyes. They were empty, dead, like looking at a corpse that hadn't stopped moving. This is Kessa, Oren said. She volunteered to serve the kingdom, to protect it from unnatural threats. He paused. She's also unbonded. The plaza erupted into chaos. Shouts of disbelief, rage, confusion crashed together into incomprehensible noise. Elara stood frozen, trying to process what she was hearing. You're lying, Vala said, pushing forward. The unbonded were exterminated. There are no others. Not quite all of them, apparently. Oren looked pleased with himself. Kessa's family hid her for decades, kept her locked away, terrified of what would happen if the council learned she existed. When I found her 6 months ago, she was half mad from isolation, but with proper guidance, she's become quite useful. What did you do to her? Elara asked, horror crawling up her throat. I gave her purpose, direction, a way to channel her power that serves the greater good. Oren's expression hardened. Unlike you, who refuses to submit to proper authority, Kessa understands her place. She knows that power like hers needs to be controlled, contained, used only as directed. Elara looked at the woman, at Kessa, and saw the truth. The dead eyes, the way she stood perfectly still waiting for orders, the complete absence of will or personality. Oren hadn't guided her. He'd broken her, turned her into a weapon with no mind of her own. You're insane, Draven said, his voice shaking with fury. You tortured her. You destroyed everything that made her human. I made her safe, Oren corrected. I made her controllable, which is what should have been done with this one. He pointed at Elara. From the beginning, but you were too weak, too sentimental, and now the kingdom suffers for your weakness. The kingdom is thriving, Marcus said. Elara's rebuilt infrastructure, solved problems, saved lives. For now. But what happens when she loses control? When her power consumes her the way it consumed so many unbonded before? Oren's voice rose. I'm offering you a way out, Your Majesty. Surrender the girl. Let her be properly trained and contained like Kessa. In return, I'll withdraw my challenge. We can rule together, unified, with the unbonded power under our control. No. Draven didn't hesitate. Elara is not a weapon to be controlled. She's a person. And she stays free, or we all go down fighting. Then we fight. Oren gestured to Kessa. Tomorrow at dawn, the two of you against the two of us. Winner takes everything. Throne, kingdom, and control of both unbonded. Those are my terms. And if we refuse, then I declare you unfit to rule, rally the council to my side, and we have a civil war that tears this kingdom apart. How many thousands die in that scenario, do you think? Oren's smile was cold. At least this way it's contained. 4 lives at risk instead of an entire kingdom. Elara's mind raced. This was the trap Lyja had predicted. Oren had found another unbonded, broken her into a perfect weapon, and now he was forcing Elara to either fight her own kind or let Draven face 2 opponents alone. We need time to discuss, Draven started. No time. Accept now, or the challenge is void and I declare you forfeit. Oren crossed his arms. What's it going to be, Your Majesty? Through the bond, Elara felt Draven's conflict, rage warring with tactical calculation, protectiveness battling against political necessity. He wanted to refuse, wanted to find another way, but they both knew there wasn't one. I accept, Draven said. Dawn, the two of us. Final resolution. Excellent. Oren turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. When you lose, and you will lose, the girl doesn't die. She comes with me, gets the same treatment as Kessa. Broken, trained, made useful. Just thought you should know what you're condemning her to. He walked away, Kessa following like a shadow, and left them standing in the plaza with the weight of tomorrow's battle crushing down on them. They retreated to the rebuilt eastern wing, which the people had turned into an impromptu headquarters. The upper rooms provided privacy for planning, and guards loyal to Draven secured every entrance. This is bad, Lycia said, pacing. Really bad. Kessa's had 6 months of intensive training with her power. Probably longer if Oren's been manipulating her since childhood. She knows how to fight, how to kill. And she has no conscience left to hold her back. So we're fighting a brainwashed weapon with decades of suppressed power, Marcus summarized. Great. We can still win, Vala said, though she didn't sound convinced. Elara's power is stronger, more flexible. If she can... I can't fight her, Elara interrupted. Everyone turned to stare. I can't. Don't you see? That's me. That's what I would have become if Draven hadn't protected me. If he'd given me to the council like they wanted, that's my future if we lose. All the more reason to win, Draven said. By destroying someone who's already been destroyed? By killing the only other person like me in the entire world? Elara's voice cracked. There has to be another way. There isn't, Lycia said flatly. Oren's backed us into a corner. We fight or we lose everything. And Kessa, whatever she was before, she's gone now. What Oren's done to her can't be undone. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've seen what happens to wolves who've been broken that thoroughly. There's nothing left to save. Lycia's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, but the kindest thing you can do for her is end it quickly. Elara wanted to argue, wanted to scream that there had to be hope, that people could be saved, that she refused to become a killer just to survive. But the dead look in Kessa's eyes haunted her, and deep down, she feared Lycia was right. Get some rest, Draven said quietly. Dawn comes fast, and we need to be ready. But Elara couldn't rest. She spent the night on the roof of the eastern wing, staring at the stars and feeling the bond hum with Draven's own sleeplessness. Around 3 a.m, he joined her. They sat in silence for a long time before he spoke. I'm sorry. For what? For all of it. For binding you to me. For dragging you into politics and danger and situations where you're forced to fight for your life every day. You should have had a normal life. A safe one. Safe and lonely, Elara said. Safe and invisible. Safe and worthless. She looked at him. I hated that life, Draven. I just didn't know there was anything else until you showed me. I showed you violence and fear. You showed me possibility. You showed me that I could matter, that I could be strong. She paused. I'm terrified of tomorrow. Terrified of what I might have to do. But I'm not sorry I'm here. Not anymore. Draven reached out and took her hand. The bond flared warm and certain between them. We're going to win, he said. Promise? Promise. Elara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that somehow they'd find a way through this that didn't end in death and horror. But when dawn came, cold and gray and merciless, all she felt was dread. The trial by combat was held in the same plaza where they'd confronted Oren the day before. But now the crowd had swelled to massive proportions. It seemed like every wolf in the capital had come to witness the resolution. They'd marked out a fighting circle, large enough for movement but contained enough to keep the battle from spilling into the crowd. 4 combatants would enter. 2 would leave. Elara stood at the edge with Draven, Lycia, Marcus, and Vala, trying to control her shaking hands. Remember, Vala said quietly, your power responds to intent. You've built walls, bridges, entire structures. You can do this. I've never tried to hurt anyone with it. Then think of it as defending, protecting, keeping Draven alive. Vala gripped her shoulder. You're strong enough for this. You've always been strong enough. Across the circle, Oren stood with Kessa. The woman's dead eyes stared straight ahead, seeing nothing, waiting for orders. The rules are simple, Oren announced to the crowd. Fight until one side yields or dies. No outside interference. No weapons beyond what we bring with us. He smiled, which in our case means quite a lot. Let's get this over with, Draven said. They entered the circle from opposite sides. The crowd fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Oren raised his hand and everything exploded into violence. Kessa moved first, impossibly fast, her hand extending toward Draven. The ground beneath him erupted, spikes of ice shooting up, trying to impale him where he stood. Draven shifted partially, his wolf reflexes saving him as he dodged. But more spikes followed, tracking his movement, forcing him to keep moving, never letting him find his footing. Elara reacted on instinct. She threw her own power forward, creating a wall of stone between Draven and the ice spikes. It held for maybe 3 seconds before Kessa shattered it with a gesture. Then Oren attacked. He'd shifted completely, a massive gray wolf with jaws that could crush bone. He went for Draven's throat, and suddenly Draven was fighting on 2 fronts, trying to avoid Kessa's magic while defending against Oren's physical assault. Elara reached for her power but hesitated. If she attacked Kessa, if she used her magic to hurt, Kessa's dead eyes turned to her. The woman raised both hands, and the air temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the ground in a wave. Ice formed on weapons, armor, skin. The crowd gasped and stumbled back from the sudden cold. And Elara realized with dawning horror that Kessa was stronger than her, much stronger. Whatever Oren had done to break her, it had also removed every limitation, every hesitation. Kessa's power flowed like a river in flood, massive, unstoppable, devastating. Elara, move! Draven's shout cut through her paralysis. She threw herself sideways as spears of ice materialized where she'd been standing. They punched through stone like it was paper, lethal and precise. Kessa advanced. No emotion, no hesitation, just relentless mechanical violence. Elara raised her hands and pushed back with her own power. Ice met ice, cold met cold, and the impact sent shockwaves through the plaza that cracked stone and shattered windows. But Elara was losing. She could feel it. Kessa had years of suppressed power, years of torment to fuel her rage, even if that rage was buried under Oren's conditioning. Fight back, Leisha screamed from outside the circle. Stop holding back and fight! But Elara couldn't. Every time she looked at Kessa's dead eyes, she saw herself, saw what she would have become if things had gone differently, and she couldn't destroy that, couldn't become the thing that had nearly destroyed her. So instead, she did something else. She stopped fighting, dropped her defenses, let her power go quiet, and she spoke. Kessa, I know you're in there. I know what he did to you, what he's still doing, but you don't have to obey him. You're not a weapon. You're a person. Kessa's attack didn't pause. Ice spears kept forming, kept flying, kept trying to kill. You're scared, Elara continued, dodging desperately. You've been scared your whole life, scared of what you are, scared of what they'll do to you if they find out. I know because I lived it too. The hiding, the shame, the constant terror of being discovered. One of the spears grazed her arm, drawing blood. Pain flared, but Elara kept talking. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here. I'm like you. And I'm telling you that you don't have to be what he made you. You can choose something else. You can be free. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Kessa's dead eyes flickered. Something moved behind them, something that might have been recognition. Then Oren's voice cracked like a whip. Kessa, kill her. Now! The moment passed. The deadness returned. And Kessa's next attack was the strongest yet. A wave of cold so intense it turned the air itself to ice crystals. Elara had no choice. She raised her hands and met it with everything she had. The two powers collided in the center of the plaza with a sound like the world breaking. Ice exploded outward. The ground cracked. The crowd screamed and scattered. And in that moment of pure magical chaos, Elara felt something impossible. The bond. Not her bond with Draven, that was still there, steady as always. This was something else. A connection forming between her and Kessa, thin as a spider's thread but real. Because they were the same. Two unbonded. Two survivors of a genocide. Two people whose power came from the same ancient source. And through that connection, Elara felt everything Kessa had endured. The childhood locked in a basement, taught to fear herself. The decades of isolation. The torture Oren had called training. The breaking of her will. The erasure of herself. But buried underneath all that, buried so deep Oren hadn't found it because he hadn't known to look, was a spark. A tiny ember of who Kessa had been before he destroyed her. Elara reached for it. Not with her hands. Not with her magic. With something deeper. With that part of her that understood survival. That had spent 22 years refusing to disappear no matter how invisible the world made her. "Come back," she whispered. And incredibly, impossibly, she felt the ember respond. Kessa's eyes cleared. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see Elara, really see her, and understand what was being offered. Freedom, choice, a chance to be something other than a weapon. "No!" Oren's voice held panic now. "Kessa, I command you." But the woman wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at Elara with eyes that were finally, blessedly alive. Then she turned to Oren, and she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been broken and was about to return the favor. "You should run," Kessa said. Her voice was rusty, like she hadn't used it in years. "You really should run." Oren shifted back to human form, holding up his hands. "Wait, we can talk about this. I can—" The ice came from everywhere at once. It wrapped around Oren like a cocoon, not killing him. Kessa wasn't merciful enough to make it quick, but trapping him, freezing him in place until he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but watch as his perfect plan disintegrated. The plaza went deathly silent. Kessa swayed, and Elara caught her before she fell. "Thank you," Kessa whispered. "I couldn't break free on my own, but you showed me how." "You're free now," Elara said. "You're free." Kessa's eyes closed, and she went limp in Elara's arms. Not dead, Elara could still feel the connection between them, faint but present, just exhausted. Decades of horror finally catching up to her. Across the circle, Draven stood over Oren's frozen form, his expression grim. "Is he alive?" "Unfortunately," Kessa murmured, "didn't think you'd appreciate me killing him, even though he deserves it." "Oh, he deserves it," Draven agreed, "but the kingdom deserves to see him tried and executed properly, for all his crimes." He looked at the council members standing at the edge of the crowd. "Does anyone dispute that?" Silence. Then it settled. Oren is arrested for treason, murder, and crimes against the kingdom. The challenge is forfeit. I remain king. Draven's voice rang out across the plaza. And anyone who has a problem with that can step forward now and state it. No one moved. "Good." Draven crossed to Elara, pulling her and Kessa both into a careful embrace. "It's over. It's finally over." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Elara believed him. But 3 months later, the kingdom looked different. The Eastern Wing remained a symbol, not of destruction, but of rebuilding. People came from all over just to see it, to touch the walls Elara had created, to marvel at what unbonded magic could accomplish. Kessa recovered slowly. The damage Oren had done to her mind went deep, and there were days she couldn't remember who she was or why she was there. But gradually, with Vala's help and Elara's support, she began to piece herself back together. She would never be what she might have been if Oren had never found her. That person was gone, broken beyond recovery. But she could be someone new, someone who chose each day to keep existing, keep healing, keep trying. That was enough. Oren's trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Once people started talking, once the fear lifted, dozens came forward with stories of his manipulation and violence. He was executed on a cold morning in early winter, and if anyone mourned him, they kept it to themselves. The council reformed, slowly, carefully, with representatives from territories that had never had a voice before. It wasn't perfect, politics never was, but it was better, fairer, more willing to acknowledge that power came in many forms, not just the traditional ones. And Elara stood on the ramparts of the Eastern Wing, watching the sun set over a kingdom that had tried to kill her and ended up depending on her instead. "You're brooding again," Draven said, appearing beside her. "I'm thinking." "That's what you call it?" She smiled despite herself. "What do you call it?" "Brooding," Definitely brooding. He leaned against the stone wall she'd built with her own power, his shoulder touching hers. What are you thinking about? About how strange it is. 3 months ago, I was nobody, a servant who didn't matter. And now? She gestured at the city below, where people went about their lives in buildings she'd helped repair, eating food stored in facilities she'd secured. Now I'm part of everything. You were always part of everything. You just didn't know it yet. That's a nice thought. But I think the truth is messier than that. Elara turned to face him. I think I was broken, and being broken made me invisible. And staying invisible kept me safe, but also kept me small. And then you refused to let me stay small. I refused to let you die, Draven corrected. Everything else was you. Was it? Because I don't think I would have found this strength if you hadn't believed I had it first. Then we helped each other. He reached out and took her hand, the bond between them humming warm and steady, not a burden anymore, but a choice they both kept making. I was drowning in politics and duty, and the weight of a crown I never really wanted. You reminded me why it mattered, why protecting people, helping them, making their lives better, why that was worth the cost. They stood there in comfortable silence as the sun dropped below the horizon and stars began to emerge. Kessa asked me something today, Elara said. She asked what I'm going to do now. Now that I've proven I'm not dangerous, now that the kingdom accepts me. She wanted to know what comes next. What did you tell her? I didn't have an answer. Elara looked at him. What does come next? I can't spend the rest of my life just rebuilding things and proving I'm useful. That's not living. That's just existing for other people's benefit. So what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Elara had spent so long focused on survival that she'd never asked herself what came after surviving. What did she actually want from a life that was finally, impossibly, her own? I want to find others, she said slowly, the words forming as she spoke them. Other unbonded. Kessa can't be the only one left. There have to be others hiding, terrified, alone. I want to find them, help them, show them they don't have to be afraid anymore. That could take years. I know. You'd have to travel, leave the capital, live rough. I know that too. And you might not find anyone. They might all be dead or broken or too afraid to reveal themselves. Maybe, but I have to try. She squeezed his hand. The bond means I can't go far without weakening us both. But there are territories within a few days' travel. I could start there, build a network, let people know there's a safe place for anyone like me. Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, not the careful political mask he wore so often. Then that's what you'll do. And I'll support you, because that's what partners do. Partners? What else would you call us? We're bound together. We fight together. We're building something together. He paused. Unless you'd prefer a different word. Elara's heart stuttered. What word did you have in mind? I was thinking something along the lines of... He turned to face her fully, and there was something vulnerable in his expression now, something open and honest that he rarely let show. Co-rulers. Equals. King and Queen, if you want the formal title. Or just Draven and Elara, if you'd rather skip the ceremony. She stared at him. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'll rule beside me. Not as my possession, or my weapon, or my political tool. As my partner, my equal. The person I trust more than anyone in this world. He took both her hands in his. You saved my life. Then you saved my kingdom. Now I'm asking if you'll help me make it into something worth saving. Elara's eyes burned. She wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to throw herself into his arms and accept everything he was offering. But she also needed to be honest. I'm still scared, she admitted. I still don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I still wake up some mornings convinced this is all a mistake and I'm going to destroy everything. Good. That means you're paying attention. Draven's smile turned gentle. I'm terrified most days, too. Terrified I'll make the wrong choice, hurt people I'm supposed to protect, let down everyone who depends on me. But you know what I've learned? What? That fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care. And caring, actually giving a damn about whether you do the right thing, that's what makes someone worth following. He pulled her closer, and the bond flared bright between them. So yes or no, Elara Vance? Will you stand beside me? Will you help me build a kingdom where people like us, people who don't fit the mold, who have power that scares others, who survive things that should have broken them, where we can not just survive but thrive? Elara looked at him, at this man who'd saved her life and then spent every day since proving she was worth saving, who'd fought beside her, believed in her, refused to let her settle for being less than she could be. And she realized that somewhere between dying and being reborn, between learning to fight and learning to build, between surviving and thriving, somewhere in all of that, she'd fallen in love with him. Not because of the bond, not because of duty or gratitude or political necessity, but because he'd shown her who she could be. And she wanted to spend the rest of her life becoming that person with him. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll stand beside you as your partner, your equal, your queen. He kissed her then, and the bond between them blazed like a star. When they finally pulled apart, the night had fully fallen, and the city below sparkled with lamplight. There's one more thing, Draven said, about your plan to find other Unbonded. What about it? I want to make it official, not just you helping them, but the kingdom protecting them. A formal decree that unbonded magic is not only legal but valued, that anyone with those gifts has a place here, a sanctuary. The council will fight you on that. Let them. We've fought worse. He pulled her close again. We'll build this together. A kingdom that doesn't just tolerate difference but celebrates it, where power in all its forms is respected, where nobody has to hide what they are or spend their life being invisible. That's a nice dream. Then let's make it real. They stood there on the ramparts, two people who should have been nothing, a wolfless servant and a king bound by desperation, who'd somehow become everything the kingdom needed. Below them, the eastern wing stood tall and proud, proof that destruction could be transformed into creation, that power could build instead of break, that people dismissed as worthless could become essential. And in the distance, beyond the city lights, the wild land stretched dark and mysterious, full of secrets and survivors waiting to be found. Elara smiled and leaned into Draven's warmth, feeling the bond hum with certainty and promise. She'd spent 22 years being nothing, being invisible, being told she was broken and worthless and didn't deserve to exist. And now she was a queen, a builder, a symbol of possibility for anyone who'd ever been dismissed or rejected or told they didn't matter. The girl who was nothing had become the one thing the kingdom couldn't ignore. And her story, their story, was only beginning. Years later, when historians wrote about this time, they would call it the Reformation, the period when the old laws fell away and new ones rose to take their place. When power was redefined, hierarchies challenged, and a kingdom learned, slowly, painfully, but inevitably, that strength came in many forms. But Elara never thought of it in those grand terms. To her, it was simpler than that. It was about a girl who learned she didn't have to be small to be safe, who discovered that the power she'd been taught to fear was actually the key to her freedom, who found love in the last place she expected and built a life from the ashes of rejection. It was about survival, not just staying alive, but living, really living. And it was about proving, once and for all, that being different wasn't a curse. It was a gift, one the world desperately needed, even if it took them far too long to see it.